The day Mei Lin Zhao refused to kneel, three men reached for their guns. Red Willow. Crossing had seen its share of violence, but nothing prepared the town for what happened when a Chinese woman stood her ground in a saloon full of whiskey and prejudice. Some called it suicide. Others called it the bravest damn thing they'd ever witnessed. What no one knew was that the woman staring down those barrels had already survived worse: betrayal, exile, and a journey across a continent that didn't want her. This is her story. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far Mei Lin's fight travels. Hit that like button and stay until the end, because what happens next will change everything you think you know about the American frontier. The stagecoach door swung open with a groan that sounded like the whole damn thing might fall apart, and Mei Lin Zhao stepped down into the Kansas dust with legs that barely remembered how to hold her weight. 6 days of rattling across prairie so flat it made her doubt the existence of mountains. 6 days of trying not to vomit on the woman beside her who smelled like onions and disapproval. 6 days of wondering if she'd made the biggest mistake of her life. Red Willow. Crossing didn't look like much. A main street of sun-bleached buildings that leaned slightly to the left, as if the wind had been working on them for years and almost had them beat. A general store with paint peeling off in strips. A saloon with bat-wing doors that creaked even when nobody was walking through them. A church with a steeple that pointed at the sky like an accusation. And everywhere, dust. Dust that coated everything, got into everything, became everything if you stayed long enough. Mei Lin grabbed her trunk, the small one, because the big one had been stolen in Chicago, along with most of her money, and stood there while the other passengers scattered like they couldn't get away from her fast enough. The driver didn't look at her, didn't help her with her luggage, just climbed back up and cracked his whip, sending the horses into motion before she'd even moved away from the wheel ruts. She watched the stagecoach disappear into its own dust cloud, taking with it her last connection to anything familiar, and felt the first real stab of fear since Boston. You just gonna stand there like a fence post, or you planning to move sometime before winter? The voice came from her left, sharp, female, with an edge that suggested the speaker had used it to cut through plenty of bullshit before. Mei Lin turned and found herself looking at a woman who might have been anywhere between 40 and 60, with gray hair pulled back so tight it probably gave her headaches and eyes that could have spotted a lie from 3 counties away. Aunt Chen? Mei Lin asked, though she already knew. The resemblance to her mother was there in the set of the jaw, the way she stood with her weight slightly forward like she was ready to either welcome you or kick you out depending on how the next 30 seconds went. Who else would be stupid enough to take in her sister's daughter after what you pulled back east? The woman looked her up and down, taking in the travel-stained dress that had been expensive once, the trunk that was nice but not nice enough, the face that still carried bruises fading from purple to yellow. Though from the looks of it, you got worse than you gave. Mei Lin's hand moved to her cheek before she could stop it. The bruises were old enough that most people didn't notice them anymore or pretended not to. Leave it to family to go straight for the wound. I didn't pull anything, she said, and hated how defensive she sounded. I left a situation that was— Save it. Aunt Chen bent and grabbed one end of the trunk like it weighed nothing. You can tell me all about your terrible decisions after we get this inside. Bakery's 2 streets over. Try to keep up and try not to make eye contact with anyone unless you want to spend the next hour answering questions about where you're from and why you're here. The bakery turned out to be a narrow building wedged between a barber shop and what looked like an empty storefront with soap-painted windows. The smell hit Mei Lin before they even opened the door: yeast and sugar and something burning, probably whatever had been in the oven too long. Inside was cramped and hot, and exactly what Mei Lin had expected: a front room with a counter and some shelves mostly empty except for a few loaves of bread wrapped in cloth, and a back room where the real work happened. An oven that looked like it had been built by someone who'd heard about ovens but never actually seen one. A work table scarred with years of kneading. Flour everywhere. Aunt Chen dropped the trunk in the corner with a thud that suggested she didn't care much about whatever was inside it. You'll sleep upstairs, room small but it's clean, which is more than you probably deserve. Work starts at 4 in the morning. You know how to bake? I can learn, Mei Lin said. That's not what I asked. No, I don't know how to bake. Aunt Chen made a noise that might have been a laugh or might have been disgust. Of course you don't. Sister married that scholar, raised you like you were going to spend your life reading poetry and painting flowers. Fat lot of good that did you. Maylin felt her jaw tighten. Your mother is dead, and the family that was supposed to take care of you after she passed sold you off to some rich white man who beat you and threw you out when you wouldn't play nice. Aunt Chen's voice was flat, factual, like she was reading from a ledger. Now you're here, which means you're my problem. So let's get a few things straight. She counted on her fingers, each point delivered like a hammer strike. 1. You work for your keep. I'm not running a charity. 2. You keep your head down and your mouth shut around the townspeople. They're already suspicious of me, and I've been here 15 years. You show up fresh from the east looking like you lost a fight with a mule, they're going to have opinions. 3. Whatever happened back in Boston stays in Boston. I don't want to hear about it, and I sure as hell don't want anyone else hearing about it. Clear? Clear, Maylin said, because what else was there to say? Good. Now go upstairs, wash that road dirt off, and get some sleep. Tomorrow you learn whether you're worth the trouble of keeping around. The room upstairs was exactly as advertised. Small, clean, depressing. A bed that was more board than mattress. A window that looked out onto an alley where someone had left a broken wagon wheel and what might have been a dead cat. A wash basin with a crack running through it that leaked water onto the floor in a slow, steady drip. Maylin sat on the bed and felt the fight go out of her all at once. This was it. This was what her life had become. A room above a struggling bakery in a town that probably didn't have 100 people in it, working for an aunt who looked at her like she was a mistake that needed correcting. No friends, no money, no prospects. And back in Boston, Thomas Weatherby was probably sitting in his study with a glass of brandy, telling his friends the sad story of the Chinese girl he'd tried to civilize, who turned out to be too wild, too stubborn, too damaged to save. She'd been so stupid, so incredibly, breathtakingly stupid. When Thomas had first paid attention to her at that gallery showing, her paintings had been displayed, a minor miracle arranged through her mother's old connections. She'd thought it was because he saw her talent. He'd stood in front of her landscape of the harbor for 20 minutes, not saying anything, just looking. And when he'd finally turned to her, his smile had been warm and his words had been everything she'd wanted to hear. You have a gift, he had said, but you're wasting it painting pretty pictures for people who don't understand what they're looking at. He'd offered to be her patron, to introduce her to the right people, to help her become the artist she was meant to be. What he'd actually meant was that he wanted to own her. The first few months had been good. He'd paid for a studio, bought her supplies, hosted dinners where important people came and looked at her work and made approving noises. She'd painted more in those months than in the entire year before, driven by the intoxicating feeling that someone finally understood what she was trying to do. Then the suggestions started. Maybe something less aggressive with the brushwork. The buyers prefer softer colors. Perhaps you could focus more on flowers. Women painting flowers always sells well. When she'd pushed back, he'd gotten cold. Withheld money for supplies. Stopped inviting her to dinners. Made it clear that his support came with conditions. And when she'd tried to leave, when she'd told him she'd rather starve than paint what he wanted, that's when his hands had gotten rough. The bruises on her face had come from him. So had the broken rib that still ached when she breathed too deep. But worse than the physical pain was the systematic destruction of everything she'd built. He'd contacted every gallery, every patron, every person who might have bought her work, and told them she was unreliable, unstable, probably stealing supplies. Within a month, she'd been blacklisted from every artistic circle in Boston. Her mother's old friends had turned their backs. Her father's family in San Francisco had sent a letter saying they couldn't help someone who'd brought shame on the family name by associating with white society in the first place. Aunt Chen had been the only one who'd answered her desperate letter. The response had been 3 sentences long. Come if you want, work if you stay. Don't expect sympathy. Maylin looked at her hands in the fading light from the window. They were still a painter's hands, stained with pigment that never quite washed out, calloused in weird places from holding brushes for hours. But there were new calluses too, from the factory work she'd done to earn enough money for the train ticket west. From scrubbing floors in a boarding house when the factory job dried up. From stealing when scrubbing floors wasn't enough. She'd become someone she didn't recognize. Someone who lied and stole and ran away instead of fighting. No more, she thought. Whatever happens here, I don't run again. It was a nice thought. Noble, even. She wondered how long it would last. 4 in the morning came like a punch to the face. Mei Lin jerked awake to the sound of something crashing downstairs, followed by her aunt's voice cutting through the darkness. "If you're not down here in 5 minutes, you can find somewhere else to sleep tonight." She stumbled down the narrow stairs in yesterday's dress, her hair still tangled, her eyes crusted with sleep, and found Aunt Chen already working. The oven was lit, radiating heat that made the whole room feel like the inside of a lung. Dough was rising in bowls lined up on the work table. The smell of yeast was so strong it was almost nauseating. "Wash your hands," Aunt Chen said without looking up from the loaf she was shaping. "Then come here and watch." For the next 6 hours, Mei Lin learned more about bread than she'd ever wanted to know. The way flour changed texture depending on humidity. The difference between kneading until the dough was smooth and kneading until you'd destroyed the gluten structure and turned it into paste. The precise moment to take a loaf out of the oven. Too early, and it was doughy. Too late, and it was brick. Aunt Chen didn't believe in gentle instruction. When Mei Lin's first attempt at shaping a loaf came out lopsided, her aunt smacked it with a wooden spoon hard enough to flatten it. "Again," she said. When the second attempt was too tight, the spoon came down again. Again. By the time the sun came up, Mei Lin's hands were covered in flour, and her back was screaming from bending over the work table, and she'd learned that her aunt was a better teacher than she'd expected. Brutal, yes, but clear. If you did it right, she left you alone. If you did it wrong, she showed you exactly what you'd done and made you fix it. There was something almost comforting in the simplicity of it. The first customer came in at 6:30, a white woman in her 40s wearing a dress that had been mended so many times it was hard to tell what the original fabric had looked like. She looked at Mei Lin for a long moment, her face going through a complicated series of expressions, then turned to Aunt Chen. "You took in family?" "My sister's daughter," Aunt Chen said, not elaborating. "From back east?" "From somewhere she's not anymore." The woman processed this, clearly wanting to ask more questions, but smart enough to know she wouldn't get answers. "Well, I hope she works out better than that last girl you had." After she left with her bread, Mei Lin asked, "What happened to the last girl? Got pregnant, ran off with a cowboy, came back 6 months later without the cowboy or the baby, and a story about bandits that nobody believed." Aunt Chen wiped down the counter with sharp, angry movements. "Whole town acted like it was my fault for hiring someone so stupid, like I'm supposed to know what someone's going to do with their personal time." "Why do you stay here?" The question came out before Mei Lin could stop it. Aunt Chen's hand paused mid-wipe. For a moment, Mei Lin thought she wasn't going to answer. Then, "Because leaving means admitting they won, and I've never been good at admitting anything." The morning rush, such as it was, brought maybe a dozen customers. Most of them did the same thing, looked at Mei Lin, looked at Aunt Chen, decided not to ask questions. A few were braver or ruder, depending on your perspective. "She speak English?" one man asked, talking over Mei Lin's head like she wasn't there. "Better than you, probably," Aunt Chen shot back. Another woman, this one younger and dressed in a way that suggested she thought highly of herself, wrinkled her nose. "I heard the Chinese eat rats. You're not putting rats in the bread, are you?" Mei Lin opened her mouth to respond, but Aunt Chen's hand clamped down on her wrist hard enough to hurt. "Just flour, water, salt, and yeast," Aunt Chen said with a smile that had no warmth in it. "Same as always. But if you're concerned about the ingredients, there's a bakery in Dodge City, only 30 miles away." The woman left without buying anything. When the door closed behind her, Aunt Chen released Mei Lin's wrist. "You were about to say something stupid, weren't you?" "I was about to tell her that we don't eat rats, we eat dog, and only on special occasions." Despite herself, Aunt Chen's mouth twitched. "You've got your mother's sense of humor. She used to do the same thing, make jokes that got her in trouble because people couldn't tell if she was serious." It was the first time her aunt had mentioned her mother without making it sound like an insult. Mei Lin didn't know what to do with that, so she changed the subject. "How long have you been dealing with this?" "What, stupid questions?" "Since the day I got here. You learned to ignore most of it. The rest you charge extra for." By noon, the day's baking was done, and the storefront was empty. Aunt Chen counted the money from the till, not much, and divided it into several small piles. "This goes to flour," she said, pushing one pile to the side. "This to yeast, this to salt, this to the landlord, and this—" She pushed a single coin toward Mei Lin. "This is yours. Don't spend it all in one place." Maylin looked at the coin. It wasn't much, barely enough for a meal, if she was careful. But it was hers, earned by her own hands, not given by someone who wanted something in return. "Thank you," she said. Aunt Chen waved her off. "Don't thank me. You worked for it. Now get out of here for a few hours. I've got paperwork to do and you're in the way." Maylin stepped out into the afternoon heat and realized she had no idea what to do with herself. She didn't know the town, didn't know anyone, had no money to spend on anything that wasn't essential. What she wanted, desperately, was to paint. She'd packed her brushes in the trunk, wrapped carefully in cloth. The paints were mostly gone, used up or left behind in Boston, but she still had the brushes, had carried them across half the country even when she'd had to leave behind clothes and books and everything else that mattered. But paint cost money. Canvas cost money. Even paper cost more than she could afford right now. She walked without direction, just moving, taking in the town. It was bigger than it had looked from the stagecoach, maybe 200 people, maybe more. There was a schoolhouse at the edge of town, empty now with summer in full swing. A livery stable where horses stamped and whinnied in the heat. A building with a sign that read "Doctor" in fading paint. And at the far end of Main Street, the saloon. She'd been told by a woman on the stagecoach to avoid saloons. "Decent women don't go near them," the woman had said, her nose in the air. "Nothing in there but drinking and gambling and men behaving like animals." Maylin had smiled and nodded and thought about how many decent women had turned their backs when she'd needed help. The saloon's doors were open, probably to let out some of the heat. From inside came the sound of men's voices, the clink of glasses, a piano playing something that might have been a song once before whoever was playing it got hold of it. She told herself to keep walking, told herself Aunt Chen's warning about keeping her head down was good advice. She walked in anyway. The conversation didn't stop exactly, but it changed. Voices got quieter, heads turned. Someone muttered something she didn't catch, and someone else laughed in a way that wasn't friendly. The interior was about what she'd expected. A bar running along one wall, tables scattered around, a piano in the corner being played by a man who looked half asleep. The floor was sticky with spilled beer and probably other things she didn't want to think about. The whole place smelled like sweat and tobacco and something that might have been vomit if she got close enough to investigate, which she had no intention of doing. A man behind the bar, tall, thick-armed, with a mustache that drooped past his chin, stared at her like she'd just sprouted a second head. "We don't serve," he started. "I'm not here to drink," Maylin interrupted. "I'm here to see if you need your piano tuned." It was a lie. She knew nothing about tuning pianos, but it was the first thing that came to mind that might justify her presence. And sometimes a confident lie worked better than a nervous truth. The bartender's frown deepened. "What makes you think our piano needs tuning?" "Because I can hear from here that it's at least 3 keys flat and 2 sharp, which means someone either stored it somewhere damp or dropped it at some point." Another lie, though she'd at least heard enough piano music in her life to know when something sounded wrong. "I can fix it for $2. You know how to tune a piano?" This from one of the men at a nearby table, his voice thick with skepticism and something darker. "My father was a musician," Maylin said, which was true. He'd played the erhu, which had nothing to do with pianos, but these men didn't need to know that. "He taught me before he died." The bartender looked like he was trying to decide whether to throw her out or just ignore her until she left on her own. "I'll think about it," he finally said. "Now, if you're not buying anything, hold on, Frank." The voice came from a table in the back corner where 3 men sat with cards spread out in front of them and glasses that had been refilled more than once. The one who'd spoken was maybe 30, with red hair going thin on top and a face that suggested he wasn't used to people disagreeing with him. He stood up, walked over, and looked Maylin up and down in a way that made her skin crawl. "You're the one staying with the Chinese woman who runs the bakery," he said. It wasn't a question. "I'm her niece." "Right, her niece." He drew the word out, making it sound like he didn't believe it. "You got a name, niece?" "Maylin Zhao." "That's a mouthful. We'll just call you Lin." He smiled, and there was nothing friendly in it. "I'm Danny Burke. I own the general store, which means I'm one of the important people around here. And I've got a question for you, Lin." Here it comes, Maylin thought. Whatever test this is, whatever game he's playing. "What's your question?" she asked, keeping her voice level. "I heard Chinese folks are good at laundry. That true?" You good at getting stains out? Someone at another table snickered. Maylin felt the anger rising in her chest, hot and sharp. The same anger that had gotten her in trouble in Boston when Thomas had suggested she should be more grateful for his attention. She wanted to throw the question back in his face, wanted to ask if all Irish folks were good at drinking themselves stupid, wanted to make him feel as small as he was trying to make her feel. Instead, she said, I don't know, never tried, but I know I'm good at spotting a man whose mother didn't teach him manners. And you're the best example I've seen all week. The snickering stopped. Danny Burke's smile disappeared. What did you just say to me? I said your mother didn't teach you manners. Would you like me to speak slower? I know some folks have trouble with English when it's not being shouted. The room went completely silent. Burke's face went red, then purple. His hand moved to his belt, and for a horrible moment Maylin thought he was reaching for a gun. But before he could do whatever he was about to do, another voice cut through the silence. Danny, leave it. The man who spoke was sitting alone at a table by the window, and Maylin wondered how she'd missed him when she first came in. He was older than Burke, maybe 35, with dark hair and darker eyes, and the kind of weathered face that came from spending most of your life outdoors. He wore dusty work clothes and had the build of someone who'd done hard labor for years. Burke spun around. This doesn't concern you, Cole. It does if you're about to start something in Frank's place that's going to end with broken furniture and me having to drag your drunk ass home again. The man, Cole, took a drink from his glass without taking his eyes off Burke. She insulted you. You probably deserved it. Let it go. She's got no right. She's got the same right as anyone else to call you an ass when you're being one. Now sit down before you embarrass yourself worse than you already have. For a moment, Maylin thought Burke was going to throw a punch. His fists were clenched, his body coiled tight, ready to explode. Then he spat on the floor near Maylin's feet and walked back to his table. The normal sounds of the saloon gradually returned. Conversation, clinking glasses, the awful piano. But everyone was still watching her, and she knew that what had just happened was going to be all over town by nightfall. So much for keeping her head down. She turned to leave, but Cole's voice stopped her. You really know how to tune a piano? She looked at him. His expression was neutral, not mocking, but not particularly friendly either. Just curious. No, she admitted. But I can learn if someone's willing to pay me to try. The corner of his mouth twitched. Might have been a smile, might have been something else. That's honest, at least. Most folks would have kept up the lie. Most folks probably have better sense than to walk into a saloon looking for work. Probably. He studied her for another moment. You should be careful around Danny Burke. He's got a mean streak and enough money to cause problems for people he doesn't like. I'll keep that in mind, Maylin said. Thanks for stepping in. Didn't do it for you. Did it because I didn't want to spend my afternoon cleaning up blood. He turned back to his drink, dismissing her. Maylin left the saloon and stood outside in the harsh sunlight, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. Her hands were shaking. She'd been stupid, so incredibly stupid, letting her anger get the better of her like that. But she also felt something she hadn't felt in months. Alive. For the first time since Boston, she'd stood up for herself, hadn't backed down, hadn't apologized for existing. And it had felt good, even if it was probably going to make her life hell. When she got back to the bakery, Aunt Chen took one look at her face and said, What did you do? Nothing. You've got the same expression your mother used to get when she'd done something she knew was going to cause trouble but didn't regret. So I'll ask again, what did you do? Maylin told her. Aunt Chen listened without interrupting, her face giving away nothing. When Maylin finished, her aunt was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, Danny Burke's father owns half the farmland around here. Danny himself is a drunk and a bully, but he's got enough influence that people don't usually cross him. I know, I'm sorry, I should have kept my mouth shut. Yes, you should have. Aunt Chen turned back to the dough she'd been working. But since you didn't, here's what's going to happen. Tomorrow, some of his friends are going to come in here and cause problems. They might break something. They might try to scare you. They might just stand around being loud and obnoxious until other customers leave. What should I do? You're going to stand there and take it. You're going to be polite. You're going to call them sir and not give them any excuse to escalate. Aunt Chen's voice was hard, final. Because if this turns into a real fight, we lose. That's how it works here. You want to survive. You swallow your pride. Mei Lin thought about Thomas, about all the times she'd swallowed her pride to keep the peace, to avoid making things worse, about how well that had worked out. "And if I don't want to just survive?" she asked quietly. Aunt Chen's hand stilled. She didn't turn around. "Then you'd better be prepared for what comes next, because pride is expensive and you're already broke." That night, Mei Lin lay in her small room and listened to the town settling into darkness. Horses in the livery, dogs barking, someone singing badly somewhere down the street. She thought about Burke's face when she'd insulted him, the way the whole saloon had gone quiet. The man called Cole, who'd stepped in for reasons that had nothing to do with protecting her. She thought about what Aunt Chen had said: swallow your pride, survive, don't make waves. And she thought about the brushes wrapped in cloth in her trunk, about the paint she couldn't afford, about the art she wasn't making because she was too busy trying to become small enough that the world might let her exist in peace. Screw that, she thought. I didn't come this far to disappear. She didn't know what she was going to do yet. Didn't have a plan. But she knew she wasn't going to spend the rest of her life apologizing for taking up space. Whatever happened next, she was going to face it standing up, even if it killed her. Burke's friend showed up 3 days later, just like Aunt Chen had predicted. There were 4 of them, all young men with too much time and too little sense, wearing the kind of clothes that suggested their fathers had money, but hadn't taught them anything useful to do with it. They walked into the bakery at mid-morning when the place was busiest, tracked mud across the floor Mei Lin had just swept, and stood there blocking the doorway while other customers tried to get past. "Well, look at this," the tallest one said, loud enough that everyone in the shop could hear. "The Chinaman's got himself a little helper. She is good with her hands, as they say Chinese girls are." The 2 women waiting at the counter went still. One of them, Mrs. Patterson, who came in every Tuesday for rye bread, looked at Mei Lin with something that might have been sympathy, or might have been the kind of pity that was worse than contempt. Mei Lin kept her eyes on the bread she was wrapping, didn't respond. Aunt Chen had been clear: ignore them until they got bored and left. "I'm talking to you," the tall one said, stepping closer to the counter. "You deaf as well as foreign?" "She can hear you just fine, Jackson," Aunt Chen said from the back room, her voice carrying that particular edge it got when she was about 2 seconds from hitting someone with a rolling pin. "Now you gonna buy something, or you just here to waste my time?" Jackson, apparently that was his name, grinned. "Maybe I want to see what kind of quality you're selling these days. Heard you got rats in the back. Health concern, you know?" "Only rats I see are the 2-legged kind standing in my shop." One of Jackson's friends snorted, trying to cover it up with a cough. Jackson's grin disappeared. "You got a smart mouth, old woman. Someone ought to teach you respect." "Someone tried once. Didn't take." Aunt Chen emerged from the back, wiping flour off her hands with a rag. "Now get out. You're scaring away customers." "We're not going anywhere until—" The door opened behind them, and a man's voice said, "You're blocking the doorway." Mei Lin looked up and felt her stomach drop. It was Cole, the man from the saloon, wearing the same dusty work clothes and carrying the same air of someone who'd seen too much to be impressed by posturing boys. Jackson turned, his shoulders squaring up. "This doesn't concern you, Cole." "It does if I can't get to the counter to buy bread." Cole didn't raise his voice, didn't sound angry, just stated it like a fact. "So either buy something or move." "Or what? You going to make us?" Cole looked at him the way you might look at a dog that had just pissed on your boots, annoyed but not particularly threatened. "No, but I'm going to stand here until you do one or the other, and I've got all day. Question is whether you've got the patience to stand here staring at me like an idiot while everyone in town watches through the window." Jackson glanced outside. A small crowd had indeed gathered, people slowing down to watch the confrontation. His face went red. "This isn't over," he said, pointing at Mei Lin. "Danny's got plans for you people." "Tell Danny I'm terrified," Aunt Chen said flatly. "Now get out before I charge you rent for the space you're taking up." They left, making sure to slam the door hard enough that the glass rattled. The customers who'd been waiting resumed their business like nothing had happened, though Mrs. Patterson gave Mei Lin a tight smile that didn't quite reach her eyes before taking her bread and leaving. When the shop was empty except for Cole, Aunt Chen said, "That's twice you've stepped in. You got a reason or you just bored?" "I need bread," Cole said. 2 loaves." And I don't like Danny Burke or his idiot friends. First reason's better than the second. Aunt Chen wrapped the bread and took his money. But I appreciate it either way. Cole nodded, took the bread, and headed for the door. Then he paused and looked back at Mei Lin. You did good, he said. Not taking the bait. Wasn't trying to be good, Mei Lin said before she could stop herself. Just trying not to make things worse. Same thing sometimes. He left without elaborating. Aunt Chen waited until he was gone before saying, That's Ethan Cole. Works as foreman on the Double R Ranch, about 5 miles outside town. Keeps to himself mostly. Got a reputation for being fair, but not friendly. Why are you telling me this? Because he's stepped in twice now, and that means something. Aunt Chen started cleaning the counter with sharp, aggressive movements. People don't do favors for free. Eventually, he's going to want something in return. What makes you think I'd give him anything? Her aunt stopped cleaning and looked at her with eyes that had seen too much to be fooled by bravado. Because you're already thinking about it. I can see it in your face. You're thinking maybe he's different, maybe he actually gives a damn about fairness instead of just using it as an excuse to feel superior. You don't know what I'm thinking. I know you're your mother's daughter, and she had a weakness for men who seemed like they might actually see her as a person instead of a problem to solve or a prize to win. Aunt Chen's voice softened just slightly. It got her hurt more than once. I'd rather you learn from her mistakes instead of repeating them. Mei Lin wanted to argue, wanted to say she wasn't her mother, wasn't going to be stupid about some man just because he'd been decent twice. But the words stuck in her throat because part of her wondered if her aunt was right. Instead, she said, I'm going to take a walk. Be back before the afternoon rush. There's an afternoon rush? No, but I like having standards. The town looked different in daylight when she wasn't being stared at or insulted. Still small, still dusty, still the kind of place that made her wonder if she'd jumped from one prison to another. But there was something almost honest about it. No one here was pretending to be more than they were. The buildings were plain because no one had money for fancy. The people were blunt because there wasn't enough society to require elaborate politeness. It was brutal, but it was straightforward. She could work with straightforward. She walked past the general store. Burke's family business, she now knew, which explained why he acted like he owned half the town, and noticed the prices posted in the window. Everything was expensive. Not Boston expensive, but expensive enough that her single coin wouldn't buy much beyond a meal. Past the store was a narrow alley, and something made her turn down it. Maybe curiosity, maybe the need to see parts of the town that weren't on display. The alley opened into a small yard behind the buildings, and there, leaning against a fence, was an old wagon missing 2 wheels and most of its paint. But on the side of the wagon, someone had painted something. Not well, and not recently. The paint was faded and peeling, but it was clearly meant to be a landscape. Hills in the distance, maybe trees, though it was hard to tell through the deterioration. Mei Lin stood there staring at it like she'd found water in the desert. Someone here painted, or had painted once, which meant maybe, just maybe, there were supplies somewhere, or at least the memory of supplies. You lost? She spun around and found a girl watching her from the doorway of the building, maybe 16, with brown hair pulled into a braid and a dress that had been patched so many times it was more patched than original fabric. No, Mei Lin said. I was just looking at this. The girl came closer, squinting at the wagon. Oh, that. My brother did that years ago, before he left. Where did he go? California. Said he was going to find gold and come back rich. The girl's expression suggested she didn't believe that story anymore, if she ever had. Ma says he probably got himself killed or arrested, but I think he just forgot about us. The painting's good, Mei Lin said, and meant it. The technique was rough, self-taught, but there was real feeling in it. Whoever had painted this had actually looked at the landscape instead of just copying what they thought a landscape should look like. You think so? Ma always said it was a waste of time and paint. The girl studied Mei Lin with open curiosity. You're the one staying with the Chinese baker, right? I'm her niece. Right. I heard about what happened at the saloon. Danny Burke's telling everyone you insulted him in front of half the town. I did insult him. He deserved it. The girl's face broke into a grin. I wish I'd seen it. Danny's an ass. Everyone knows it, but nobody says it because his family's got money. She stuck out her hand. I'm Sarah Miller. Mei Lin shook it. Maylin Zhao. That's pretty. What's it mean? Beautiful forest. My mother chose it. Better than Sarah. My ma just liked the sound of it. Sarah glanced back at the building. A boarding house, Maylin realized now. I should get back before Ma notices I'm talking instead of working. But if you want to know about paints and stuff, old Mr. Henderson might have some. He used to sell art supplies before his store went under. Lives above the empty shop next to your aunt's place. Thank you, Maylin said, and meant it. Sarah waved and disappeared back inside, leaving Maylin alone with the faded painting and a spark of hope she hadn't felt in weeks. She found Mr. Henderson exactly where Sarah had said he'd be, in a small apartment above the empty storefront, surrounded by boxes and the kind of clutter that accumulated when someone had given up on organizing their life. He was old, 70 at least, with hands that shook slightly and eyes that were still sharp despite the years. You want art supplies? He said, when she explained why she'd knocked. What for? To paint. Obviously to paint. I'm asking why. Nobody around here paints except as a hobby, and you don't look like you've got time for hobbies. Maylin considered lying, making up some story about decorating the bakery or painting signs. But there was something in the old man's face that suggested he'd spot a lie instantly and wouldn't appreciate it. Because I need to, she said. Because I haven't painted in months and it's driving me crazy, and I saw a painting on an old wagon and remembered what it felt like to make something instead of just surviving. Henderson studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded like she'd passed some kind of test. Come in. Watch your step. Place is a mess. The apartment was indeed a mess, but it was the kind of mess that made sense once you looked closer. Boxes were labeled and stacked by category. Books were piled but organized by subject. And in the back corner, covered with a sheet, were shelves containing exactly what she'd hoped to find: paints, brushes, canvas, paper. Most of this is old, Henderson said, pulling the sheet off. Haven't sold anything in years. Town's not exactly full of artists. How much? Maylin asked, already calculating how long it would take to save enough from her bakery wages. For what? You haven't told me what you need. Everything, but I'll settle for whatever I can afford. She showed him her coin, which probably isn't much. Henderson took the coin, looked at it, then looked at her. This'll buy you 3 tubes of paint and maybe a brush. Or, he set the coin on a shelf and turned to face her fully. You could work for it. Doing what? I need someone to help me catalog and organize this mess. My hands aren't what they used to be, and my daughter keeps threatening to throw everything out if I don't get it sorted. You help me do that a few hours a week, and you can use whatever supplies you want while you're here. Take home what you need for projects. Sound fair? It sounded too good to be true, which meant there had to be a catch. Why? Maylin asked. You don't know me. I could steal everything and disappear. You could, Henderson agreed. But you won't. You've got the look of someone who's had things taken from them, not someone who does the taking. Besides, if you do steal from me, your aunt will probably beat you unconscious and return everything herself. She's got a reputation for handling her own problems. Despite herself, Maylin smiled. She does. So we have a deal? She thought about Aunt Chen's warning about people wanting something in return for favors. Thought about Thomas and his so-called patronage that had turned into chains. But she also thought about those brushes in her trunk, about the empty feeling that came from not creating anything, about how she'd promised herself she wasn't going to keep surviving at the expense of living. Deal, she said. They shook on it, and Maylin left with 3 tubes of paint, 2 brushes, and a piece of canvas that had seen better days but was still usable. It wasn't much. But it was enough to start. That night, after the bakery closed and Aunt Chen went to bed, Maylin set up in her small room and painted for the first time in 4 months. She painted the view from her window, the alley, the broken wagon wheel, the dead cat that turned out to actually be a very alive cat that just liked sleeping in weird positions. She painted it exactly as it was, ugly, broken, real. And when she finished, she felt like she could breathe again. The next morning, she woke to find Aunt Chen standing in her doorway, looking at the painting propped against the wall. You're better than I expected, her aunt said. My mother taught me. Your mother taught you technique. This, she gestured at the painting. This is something else. This is actually seeing things instead of just copying them. It was the closest thing to a compliment Aunt Chen had given her, and Maylin didn't know what to do with it. Thank you, she said finally. Don't thank me, just don't let it interfere with work. Aunt Chen turned to leave, then paused. And don't leave it where customers can see. Last thing we need is people thinking we've got time for art when we should be baking. But the painting stayed where it was, visible from the stairs, and Mei Lin noticed her aunt never told her to move it again. The routine settled into something almost comfortable over the next 2 weeks. Wake at 4, bake until noon, help Henderson organize his chaos for a few hours, return to the bakery for whatever evening work needed doing, paint until her eyes gave out. It was exhausting, but it was the good kind of exhausting, the kind that came from actually doing things instead of just enduring. She saw Ethan Cole twice more during that time. Once when he came in for bread and nodded at her without saying anything. Once when she was walking back from Henderson's and he was loading supplies onto a wagon outside the general store. He'd looked up, met her eyes for a brief second, then gone back to work. She told herself she wasn't disappointed by the lack of conversation. Told herself Aunt Chen was right to be suspicious of favors. Told herself she didn't need anything from him or anyone else. She was getting good at lying to herself. The confrontation she'd been expecting came on a Thursday, during what passed for the afternoon rush. 6 customers in the shop, including Mrs. Patterson and a rancher named Wilson, who bought 3 loaves every week for his crew. The door opened and Danny Burke walked in. He was alone this time, which somehow made it worse. When he'd sent his friends, it had been theater. This felt like actual intent. Afternoon, he said to the room in general, his voice pleasant, his smile friendly. Fine day, isn't it? The other customers mumbled agreement and suddenly became very interested in the bread they were examining. Burke walked up to the counter where Mei Lin was standing. Up close, she could smell the whiskey on him, even though it wasn't even 2 in the afternoon. I've been thinking about our conversation at the saloon, he said, still smiling, and I realized I might have come across as rude. I'd like to apologize. Mei Lin didn't believe him for a second, but Aunt Chen's warning echoed in her head. Be polite. Don't give them an excuse to escalate. Apology accepted, she said carefully. Good, good. I'm glad we can be civil. He leaned against the counter, too close, invading her space in a way that was clearly deliberate. See, the thing is, I've been doing some asking around about you, found out some interesting things. Her stomach dropped. I don't know what you did this. You came from Boston, right? Running away from some scandal involving a wealthy gentleman who had you as his, what's the word, mistress? No, that's not quite right. Pet project, maybe? The shop went dead silent. Every eye turned toward them. I don't know who told you that, Mei Lin said, her voice steady despite the panic rising in her chest. But it's not true. No? That's not what my sources say. They say you attached yourself to some rich man, played the poor exotic flower routine, then threw a fit when he tried to wife you up proper. Broke his nose, I heard. Destroyed some valuable property. Then ran west before the authorities could catch up with you. It was close enough to the truth to be dangerous and wrong enough to be slanderous. Thomas had never tried to marry her. He'd barely acknowledged her as human once he realized she wouldn't be his obedient little artist. She'd broken his nose, yes, but only after he'd put his hands around her throat. And the valuable property had been her own paintings, which she'd destroyed rather than let him sell them. But none of that mattered, because Burke's version was the one people would believe. The version where she was the problem, the troublemaker, the ungrateful foreign woman who'd bitten the hand that fed her. You don't know what you're talking about, she said. Maybe not. But people love a good story, don't they? And this is a great story. Poor white man tries to help a Chinese girl rise above her station, and she repays him with violence and theft. Burke's smile widened. I wonder what your aunt's customers will think when they hear it. I wonder if they'll want to buy bread from someone harboring a criminal. Get out! Aunt Chen's voice cut through the shop like a blade. She'd emerged from the back room holding a rolling pin, and from the look on her face, she was fully prepared to use it. Get out now, or I'll show you what Chinese people do to rats. Burke raised his hands in mock surrender. No need for threats. I'm just having a conversation. You're spreading lies and trying to ruin our business. That's not conversation. That's something else entirely. Aunt Chen advanced around the counter, rolling pin raised. You've got 3 seconds. Fine, I'm leaving. Burke backed toward the door, still smiling. But think about what I said. Think about how much easier your life would be if you just packed up and left. Went somewhere people don't know your niece's history. He left, and the remaining customers suddenly remembered they had other places to be. Within 2 minutes, the shop was empty except for Mei Lin and her aunt. Mei Lin's hands were shaking. She gripped the edge of the counter, trying to stop them. How much of what he said was true? Aunt Chen asked quietly. Some of it, not the way he told it. Tell me the real version. So Mei Lin did. All of it. Thomas's initial kindness, the slow tightening of control, the moment she'd realized she was trapped, the fight that had ended with his broken nose and her running, the fear that he'd use his connections to destroy her reputation, which he apparently had. When she finished, Aunt Chen was quiet for a long time. You should have told me this before you came, she said finally. Would you have let me come if I had? Probably not. Aunt Chen set down the rolling pin. But now you're here, and Burke's going to make this as difficult as possible because that's what men like him do. They find weak spots and they push until something breaks. What do I do? We keep working, we keep our heads down, and we wait for him to get bored or make a mistake. Aunt Chen's jaw set in a line Mei Lin was starting to recognize as stubborn determination. I've been here 15 years, survived worse than Danny Burke. We'll survive this too. But that night, lying in her room, Mei Lin wasn't so sure. She'd already survived Boston and the journey west and the first few weeks of rebuilding. How much more surviving was she supposed to do before she got to actually live? She got up and looked at her paintings. There were 5 now, all of them capturing different pieces of Red Willow Crossing. The broken wagon, the main street at dawn, the prairie stretching out beyond the last buildings, Sarah Miller laughing at something, caught in a moment of unguarded joy. This was living, she reminded herself. Creating these, making something that hadn't existed before. This was living, not just surviving. But Burke's words kept echoing in her head. How much easier your life would be if you just packed up and left. She'd run from Boston. Would she run from here too? Keep running every time someone threatened her, every time the past caught up, every time standing her ground became dangerous? The answer came surprisingly easily. No. She was done running. Whatever Burke did next, whatever the town thought, whatever consequences came from Thomas's long reach and her own choices, she'd face it here. Even if facing it meant losing everything again. Because the alternative was spending the rest of her life as a ghost, always moving, never belonging, surviving, but never actually living. And she'd had enough of that to last a lifetime. 3 days passed. Then a week. Burke didn't come back, but the damage was done. Customers dwindled from a trickle to almost nothing. People crossed the street to avoid walking past the bakery. Someone threw a rock through the window at midnight. Not big enough to shatter it completely, but enough to crack the glass in a spiderweb pattern that couldn't be ignored. Aunt Chen paid to have it replaced and said nothing about the cost. Mei Lin kept baking, kept organizing Henderson's supplies, kept painting, and kept waiting for the next blow to fall. It came on a Wednesday afternoon when Ethan Cole walked into the bakery and said, "I need to talk to you." "We're closed," Aunt Chen said, which was a lie since it was barely 2 o'clock. "I can see that." Cole looked at Mei Lin. "I need to talk to her. Alone." "Anything you need to say, you can say in front of me," Aunt Chen said, crossing her arms. "Actually, I can't." Cole's expression was unreadable. "This is ranch business." "She doesn't work at your ranch." "Not yet." Mei Lin felt something shift in the air. Tension, possibility, danger. She couldn't tell which. "What are you talking about?" Cole pulled out a piece of paper and set it on the counter. "The Double R needs someone to handle the books, keep track of expenses, payroll, supplies. The man who was doing it retired last month and moved back to Missouri. Owner's been asking around for someone who can read, write, and do arithmetic. Preferably someone who won't drink the wages or steal from the till." Mei Lin stared at the paper. It was a job offer, written in precise handwriting, offering wages that were 3 times what she made at the bakery. "Why me?" she asked. "Because you're smart. You need the money, and you're desperate enough to take a job that requires living on the ranch property instead of in town." Cole's voice was matter-of-fact, not unkind, but not particularly warm either. "Also because my boss doesn't give a damn about whatever rumors Danny Burke's spreading as long as the work gets done." "Living on the property?" Aunt Chen's voice was sharp. "Absolutely not. It's not negotiable. The work starts early, goes late, and the ranch is too far out to travel back and forth every day." Cole looked at Mei Lin. "There's a cabin on the property, small but private. You'd have your own space." It was too good to be true. Had to be. Job offers didn't just appear when you needed them most, not without strings attached. What else? Mei Lin asked. What aren't you saying? Cole's mouth twitched, almost a smile. Smart question. The catch is the ranch hands are going to be rough. Most of them are decent enough, but they're not used to taking orders from women, especially not Chinese women. You're going to have to prove yourself every single day. I've been doing that since I got here. This'll be worse. These are men who work hard and drink harder and don't have much patience for change. He paused. But the owner backs his employees. If they give you trouble and you report it, he'll deal with it. I'll deal with it. You won't be alone out there. Mei Lin looked at Aunt Chen, whose face had gone through several complicated emotions and landed on frustrated resignation. It's a good offer, her aunt said finally. Better than you'll get anywhere else around here. But you don't think I should take it. I think you should know what you're walking into. Ranch life is hard. Men out there play by different rules than they do in town. Aunt Chen looked at Cole. No offense. None taken. She's right. Cole turned to Mei Lin. Take a day to think about it, but I need an answer by tomorrow. The owner wants someone started by next week. After he left, Mei Lin and her aunt stood in silence. You want to take it, Aunt Chen said. It wasn't a question. I want to stop being a burden. I want to earn enough money that Bert can't just starve us out by ruining the bakery's reputation. You're not a burden. I am, and we both know it. Mei Lin picked up the job offer. If I take this, you can tell people I left. The scandal leaves with me. Your business goes back to normal. That's not how it works, isn't it? Burke wants me gone. This gives him what he wants without making me run away. Aunt Chen's expression softened slightly. And you get to stay close enough that it doesn't feel like running. That too. Her aunt sighed, a long, weary sound. Your mother would kill me for letting you do this. My mother's not here. No, she's not. Aunt Chen reached out and gripped Mei Lin's shoulder, the closest thing to affection she'd shown since Mei Lin arrived. But I am. So if you take this job and those ranch hands give you hell, you tell me. I'll handle it. With what, your rolling pin? If necessary. Mei Lin took the job. The cabin smelled like dust and mouse droppings and decades of loneliness. One room, barely bigger than the space above the bakery, with a stove that looked like it hadn't been used since before the war and a bed frame missing its mattress. A single window facing east, cracked in one corner. Floorboards that creaked with every step. Mei Lin set down her trunk and tried not to let the disappointment show on her face. Previous guy who had this job slept in the bunkhouse with the hands, Ethan Cole said from the doorway. He hadn't come inside, like he was giving her space to process. Owner figured you'd want privacy, so he had this place cleared out. It's not much. It's fine, Mei Lin said, which was a lie, but what else was she supposed to say? There's a mattress coming from town, should be here by tonight. And the stove works, I checked it myself this morning. He paused. If you need anything else, let me know. I'll be fine. Cole looked like he wanted to say something else, then decided against it. Ranch House is that building to the north. Owner's name is Richard Montgomery, but everyone calls him Mr. Montgomery or Sir. He's fair, but he expects results. Office where you'll be working is attached to the house. I'll show you in the morning. He left, and Mei Lin stood in the empty cabin trying to convince herself this wasn't a mistake. She spent the rest of the day making the place livable. Swept out the mouse droppings and the dust and what looked like the remains of a bird's nest that had fallen through a hole in the ceiling. Scrubbed the floor until the wood showed through the grime. Cleaned the window well enough that she could actually see through it. The mattress arrived at sunset, brought by two ranch hands who looked at her with open curiosity and didn't say a word beyond asking where she wanted it. She told them against the far wall, and they left it there, then disappeared back toward the bunkhouse without introducing themselves. That night she lay on the new mattress, thin but better than nothing, and listened to the sounds of the ranch settling in around her. Horses in the corral, men's voices from the bunkhouse, too far away to make out words, but close enough to remind her she wasn't alone. The wind moving through the prairie grass with a sound like rushing water. She thought about Aunt Chen, about the bakery, about Sarah Miller and old Henderson, and the fragile life she'd started to build in Red Willow Crossing. Wondered if taking this job meant abandoning all of that or protecting it. Probably both. Sleep didn't come easy, and when it did, it brought dreams of Thomas standing in the cabin doorway, smiling that smile that meant he was about to take something from her. She woke before dawn, dressed in the dark, and went to find the office. The ranch house was bigger than she'd expected. 2 stories, painted white, with a porch that wrapped around 3 sides. The kind of house that suggested the owner had money, but didn't feel the need to show off about it. The attached office was smaller, accessed through a side door that had been left unlocked. Inside was chaos. Papers everywhere, receipts, ledgers, bills of sale, employment records, all of it thrown into boxes or stacked on the desk or shoved into drawers that no longer closed properly. The previous bookkeeper had apparently believed in a filing system that consisted of put it somewhere and hope you remember where. Maylin stood there taking it in, feeling the enormity of the task settle onto her shoulders like a physical weight. Bit of a mess, isn't it? She turned and found a man in his 50s standing in the interior doorway, the one that connected to the main house. He was tall, graying, with the kind of weathered face that came from spending a life outdoors. His clothes were nice but practical, and he carried himself with the easy confidence of someone who'd earned his authority instead of inheriting it. "Mr. Montgomery?" she guessed. "That's right. And you're Maylin Zhao." He came into the office and looked around with the expression of someone confronting a problem they'd been avoiding. "I'll be honest with you, Miss Zhao. This is worse than I thought it was. My previous bookkeeper, Harrison, was good with numbers but terrible with organization. When he retired, he basically dumped 15 years of records in here and said, 'Good luck.' How have you been managing?" "Badly. I've been doing the basics myself, payroll, immediate expenses, but everything else has piled up. I need someone to sort through this mess, figure out what we've actually spent versus what we've budgeted, and create a system that doesn't require a treasure map to find a single receipt." Maylin walked to the desk and picked up one of the ledgers. The handwriting was decent, the numbers clearly recorded, but there was no organization to it. Expenses from 3 years ago mixed with current bills. Employee records filed alphabetically, but split across multiple books for no apparent reason. "This is going to take weeks," she said. "I'm aware. That's why I'm paying you well." Montgomery pulled out a chair, the only one in the room that wasn't covered in papers. "Sit. Let's talk about expectations." They spent the next hour going over what he needed: a clear accounting of the ranch's finances, a system for tracking expenses that didn't require him to dig through boxes, regular reports on where the money was going and whether they were staying within budget. Eventually, maybe, suggestions on how to run things more efficiently. "The men aren't going to like taking directions from you," Montgomery said bluntly. "Not because you're bad at your job, but because most of them have never worked for a woman before, especially not a Chinese woman." Ethan mentioned that. "Ethan's got a good sense for how people work. Listen to him." Montgomery stood. "One more thing. I don't care about whatever gossip Danny Burke is spreading in town. You do your job well, you'll have my support. You cause problems or prove him right, you won't. Fair?" "Fair." "Good. Office hours are 6 to 6, but I'm flexible if you need to work different times to avoid the heat. Kitchen's through that door if you need water or coffee. Don't bother knocking, just come in." He headed for the interior door, then paused. "And Miss Zhao, welcome to the Double R." After he left, Maylin sat in the chair he'd cleared and looked at the disaster surrounding her. "Weeks of work," he'd said. More like months if she was being realistic. But it was work she knew how to do. Numbers didn't lie or gossip or care about the color of your skin. They just sat there waiting to be organized, and there was something almost comforting in that. She rolled up her sleeves and started sorting. By noon, she'd created 6 piles: current expenses, past expenses, employee records, receipts needing verification, documents she couldn't identify, and pure garbage. The garbage pile was surprisingly large. Ethan appeared in the doorway carrying a plate with bread and cheese. "Figured you'd forget to eat." "I wasn't hungry." "That's what forgetting to eat means." He set the plate on the one clear corner of the desk. "Making progress?" "Depends on your definition of progress. I figured out that the previous bookkeeper thought filing things by the phase of the moon was a valid organizational system." Ethan's mouth twitched. Harrison was odd. Good with numbers, terrible with everything else. He once filed a feed bill under F for feed instead of with the other bills because he said it made more sense to him. That explains so much. Maylin picked up the bread, realized she actually was hungry, and took a bite. "How long have you been foreman here?" 6 years. Worked as a hand before that for another 3. You like it? Beats the alternative. She waited for him to elaborate, but he didn't. Just stood there, watching her eat with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You going to tell me what the alternative was?" she finally asked. "No." He said it simply, no apology in it. "Some things are better left alone." Fair enough. She had plenty of her own things she didn't want to talk about. "The men are going to test you," Ethan said after a moment. "Probably soon. They'll push boundaries, see what you'll tolerate. How you handle it matters." "What would you do?" "I'd knock someone unconscious and establish dominance." He said it deadpan, and it took her a second to realize he was joking. Almost joking. "But that probably won't work for you. You'll need to find your own way." "Any suggestions?" "Don't back down. Don't apologize for doing your job. And if someone crosses a line, report it. Montgomery's not going to fire his bookkeeper for standing up to a ranch hand who's being an ass." "What if the ranch hand is more valuable than the bookkeeper?" "Then Montgomery will have to make a choice about what kind of ranch he's running." Ethan moved toward the door. "But I don't think it'll come to that. Most of the men are decent once they get used to you." "And the ones who aren't? That's what I'm here for." He left before she could ask what he meant by that. The test came 2 days later, exactly like Ethan had predicted. Maylin was in the office going through payroll records when one of the ranch hands walked in without knocking. He was maybe 25, stocky, with the kind of face that suggested he smiled a lot but wasn't smiling now. "You the one doing the books?" he asked. "I am." "Good. There's a mistake in my pay. I'm short $5. Maylin set down her pen. "What's your name?" "Jack Riley." She pulled out the current ledger and found his name. According to the records, he'd been paid exactly what he was owed based on the hours Montgomery had recorded. "You're not short," she said. "You worked 42 hours at 50 cents an hour. That's $21, which is what you were paid." "No, I worked 47 hours. I did extra work fixing fence on Tuesday." Maylin checked the notes. No record of extra hours on Tuesday. She looked up at Riley and saw something in his face that made her stomach tighten. He was lying, testing her, seeing if she'd just hand over money to avoid conflict. "If you did extra work, Mr. Montgomery would have noted it," she said calmly. "Since he didn't, either you're mistaken about when you did the work, or it wasn't authorized overtime." "I'm not mistaken." "Then take it up with Mr. Montgomery. If he confirms the extra hours, I'll adjust your pay accordingly." Riley's expression hardened. "I'm telling you I worked those hours? You calling me a liar?" "I'm saying the records don't match your claim, and I need verification before I can change them." "Maybe your records are wrong. Maybe you don't know what you're doing." Maylin stood up. She was shorter than him by a good 6 inches, but she'd learned in Boston that backing down only made things worse. "Maybe you're trying to cheat the ranch out of $5, and maybe you thought I'd be too scared or too stupid to notice." She kept her voice level, but let the steel show through. "I'm neither, so either bring me proof of those extra hours or get out of my office." The room went quiet. Riley stared at her, his face going red. Then a voice from the doorway said, "Problem here?" "Ethan, of course." "No problem," Riley said quickly. "Just a misunderstanding." "Didn't sound like a misunderstanding. Sounded like you were trying to intimidate Miss Zhao." "I wasn't." "You were." Ethan's voice was flat, cold. "And now you're going to apologize and leave, in that order." Riley looked between them, clearly calculating whether fighting this was worth it. Whatever he saw in Ethan's face made the decision for him. "Sorry," he muttered. "My mistake about the hours." He left, and Maylin sat down, her hands shaking slightly from the adrenaline. "You did good," Ethan said. "I almost caved, almost just gave him the money to make him leave." "But you didn't." He leaned against the doorframe. "Word will spread. They'll know you're not an easy mark." "What if next time you're not here? Then you handle it yourself. Or you come find me. Or you tell Montgomery." He paused. "But I don't think there'll be many next times." Riley just learned an expensive lesson about who actually runs the books around here. Over the next 3 weeks, Maylin settled into the rhythm of ranch life. Up before dawn, coffee in the kitchen while the house was still quiet, then into the office before the heat became unbearable. She worked through the chaos methodically, creating order from Harrison's disaster one box at a time. The men tested her twice more. Once when someone accidentally knocked over a stack of carefully organized receipts and watched to see if she'd cry about it. She'd simply stared at him until he got uncomfortable and left, then spent 3 hours reorganizing everything. The second time was more direct. A ranch hand named Cooper who decided to lean over her shoulder while she was working and breathe comments about how complicated it all looked, how maybe she needed help from someone who understood how ranches worked. She told him if he didn't get his face out of her personal space in the next 3 seconds, she was going to stick her pen somewhere he wouldn't enjoy. He'd laughed, thinking she was joking, right up until she turned around with the pen in her hand and an expression that made it clear she absolutely was not. Cooper never bothered her again. But not all the interactions were hostile. Some of the men were just curious. They'd stop by the office on their way to somewhere else, ask how the work was going, sometimes share stories about Harrison's organizational quirks. A few even asked if she could help them with their own paperwork, letters to family, calculating how much they'd saved, figuring out if they could afford to send money home. She helped them, and slowly, the atmosphere shifted from suspicious to something closer to acceptance. Montgomery noticed. "You're doing well," he said one evening when he found her still working past dinner. "Better than I expected, honestly." "You expected me to fail?" "I expected this to take 6 months and involve a lot more drama. You've cut that timeline in half and handled the drama without my intervention." He pulled up the chair. "I wanted to ask you something." "What? Why did you take this job?" "Cole said you were working at your aunt's bakery, and while this pays better, it's not exactly a promotion in terms of comfort or social standing." Maylin considered lying, giving him a simple answer that wouldn't invite more questions. But Montgomery had been honest with her from the start, and something about that made her want to return the favor. "Someone in town was making things difficult," she said, "for me and for my aunt. Taking this job removed me from the situation without making it look like I was running away." "Danny Burke." It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. "Yes." "He's a child playing at being powerful," Montgomery said with clear distaste. "His father has actual influence, but Danny's just a drunk with a mean streak who thinks owning a store makes him important. He's doing a good job of destroying my aunt's business. Only because people are cowards who'd rather go along with him than stand up to him." Montgomery stood. "For what it's worth, I've been telling everyone in town that you're the best bookkeeper I've had in years. Won't change Burke's mind, but it might change a few others." After he left, Maylin sat in the quiet office and felt something unfamiliar. Hope that maybe, just maybe, this was going to work out. Then 3 days later, everything went to hell. She was in town picking up supplies. Montgomery had asked her to handle the monthly orders from the general store, which meant dealing with Burke's establishment whether she wanted to or not. She'd been dreading it, but the alternative was having someone else do it, and she refused to hide. The store was busy when she walked in. A Saturday afternoon, people stocking up for the week ahead. She kept her head down, collected the items on her list, and brought them to the counter where Burke's clerk, a nervous boy named Timothy, who couldn't have been more than 16, started tallying everything up. Then Burke appeared from the back room. "Well, well," he said, his voice carrying across the store. "Look who decided to show her face in town. How's ranch life treating you, Lynn?" "Fine, thank you." She kept her voice neutral, polite. "Give him nothing to work with." "I heard you've been handling their books." "That's interesting, considering I also heard you can't actually read English very well." Montgomery know he's trusting his finances to someone who probably can't tell the difference between a bill of sale and a recipe. Several customers had stopped shopping to watch. Timothy looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. "I can read just fine," Maylin said, "and Mr. Montgomery is satisfied with my work." "For now. But what happens when he figures out you've been stealing from him? That's what you people do, isn't it? Steal, lie, take advantage of good Christian folks who make the mistake of trusting you." The store went dead silent. Maylin felt the rage building in her chest, hot and familiar. This was the moment where she could back down, could take the insult and leave with what little dignity he'd allow her to keep, or she could fight. "I've never stolen anything in my life," she said, her voice steady despite the anger. "But you know what I have done? I've looked at your prices, been comparing them to what the same goods cost in Dodge City. Interesting how everything here costs about 20% more." Burke's face went still. "Prices are based on transportation costs." "That's what I thought too, until I asked around and found out that the transportation costs are the same for everyone, which means you're just charging extra because you can, because you're the only general store for 30 miles and people don't have a choice." She picked up her list. I wonder what your customers would think if they knew that. You threatening me? I'm stating facts. You seem to like doing that, so I figured I'd try it myself. She looked at Timothy. How much for these supplies? Timothy glanced at Burke, then back at her. $43. Maylin counted out the money and set it on the counter. Thank you, Timothy. She turned to leave and Burke grabbed her arm. Hard enough to hurt. You think you're clever? He hissed, his face inches from hers. You think embarrassing me in public is going to make your life easier? Let go of me. Or what? You'll cry to your foreman? Run back to the ranch? Let go of her. The voice came from behind her, and Maylin's stomach dropped because she recognized it. Ethan. Burke released her arm and stepped back, but his expression was triumphant. Cole. Perfect timing. You can escort your little bookkeeper back to the ranch where she belongs. I'm not here for her. I'm here to tell you that if you touch her again, we're going to have a problem. Ethan's voice was quiet, conversational, and somehow that made it more threatening than if he'd shouted. She insulted me. In my own store. She stated facts. You don't like facts. That's your issue. Ethan looked at Timothy. Load those supplies in the wagon outside. Now. Timothy scrambled to obey. Burke's hands were clenched into fists. You think Montgomery's going to keep protecting her when he finds out what she really is? When I tell him about her past? I think Montgomery's smarter than you give him credit for. And I think he doesn't care what you have to say about anything. Ethan met Burke's eyes. Now, unless you want to make this an actual problem, I suggest you step back and let us leave. For a moment, Maylin thought Burke was going to throw a punch. The tension in the store was thick enough to choke on. Then Burke smiled. This isn't over. It never is with people like you, Ethan said. Timothy, those supplies loaded yet? Yes, sir. Outside, Maylin climbed onto the wagon seat and tried to stop her hands from shaking. Ethan got up beside her and took the reins without saying anything. They were halfway back to the ranch before she found her voice. Thank you. Don't thank me. That made things worse. He was already making things as bad as he could. No, he wasn't. Now he's going to escalate. Ethan kept his eyes on the road. You should have just let it go. Let what go? Him calling me a thief and a liar in front of half the town? Yes. Maylin stared at him. You can't be serious. I'm completely serious. You think you won something back there, but all you did was humiliate a man who doesn't handle humiliation well, which means he's going to come back harder. So I should just let him insult me? Let him spread lies? If it keeps you safe, yes. Ethan's jaw was tight. You don't understand how this works. Burke has power here. Money, connections, people who owe his family favors. You have none of those things. Fighting him head on is stupid. Then what am I supposed to do? Just take it forever? You're supposed to be smart about it. Pick your battles. Don't give him ammunition. I didn't give him anything he didn't already have. You gave him a reason to destroy you publicly. Ethan finally looked at her, and his expression was hard. And when he does, I won't be able to stop it. They rode the rest of the way in silence. That night, Maylin couldn't sleep. She kept replaying the confrontation, wondering if Ethan was right, if she just made everything worse by refusing to back down. But then she thought about Thomas, about all the times she'd backed down to keep the peace, and where that had gotten her. Maybe Ethan was right. Maybe she was being stupid and reckless and setting herself up for disaster. But she was so tired of being afraid. The knock on her cabin door came just after midnight. She woke instantly, her heart pounding, grabbed the fire poker from beside the stove and moved to the door. Who is it? It's Cole. We've got a problem. She opened the door. Ethan was standing there, still dressed, looking grim. What kind of problem? The kind where someone just burned down your aunt's bakery. The world tilted. What? Fire started about an hour ago. By the time anyone noticed, the whole building was going up. They managed to contain it before it spread to the neighboring shops, but the bakery's gone. My aunt. She's fine. Got out with some burns on her hands, but she's alive. She's at the doctor's now. Maylin was already moving, grabbing her coat, her boots, not thinking clearly, just acting. I'll take you to town, Ethan said. The ride felt like it took forever. When they finally reached Red Willow Crossing, the smell of smoke was thick in the air. The bakery, what was left of it, was a blackened skeleton, still smoldering. People stood around watching, their faces lit by the dying flames. Mei Lin found Aunt Chen sitting on a crate outside the doctor's office, her hands wrapped in bandages, her face streaked with soot. "You shouldn't have come," her aunt said when she saw her. "Of course I came." Mei Lin sat beside her. "What happened?" "Fire started in the back room, spread fast, I barely got out." Aunt Chen's voice was flat, emotionless. "Everything's gone. The oven, the supplies, the building, everything. We'll rebuild." "With what money?" "I don't have insurance, can't afford it." "Then I'll help. I'm making good wages at the ranch." "This wasn't an accident." Aunt Chen looked at her, and her eyes were hard. "This was Burke. I know it was. Just like I know he's going to get away with it because no one saw anything, and even if they did, they won't say." Mei Lin felt cold settle into her bones. "Did you see him?" "Didn't need to. I know how these things work. You embarrassed him this afternoon, and now he's making you pay for it. Through me, because hurting you directly would bring Montgomery down on him. I'll tell Montgomery. He'll do nothing without proof, and there is no proof." Aunt Chen stood, wincing as the movement pulled at her burned hands. "You need to leave. Go back east. Go to California. I don't care. But get out of Kansas before Burke decides burning down buildings isn't enough." "I'm not leaving." "Then you're a fool." Her aunt's voice cracked. "I've lost everything because of you. Don't make it worse by getting yourself killed." The words hit like a slap. "I didn't ask for this," Mei Lin said quietly. "No, you just made choices that led here." Aunt Chen turned away. "Go back to the ranch. I don't want to see you right now." Ethan drove her back in silence. When they reached the cabin, he finally spoke. "She's wrong, you know, about this being your fault." "Is she?" "Burke did this, not you. He's responsible for his own actions." "But I gave him the reason." "He didn't need a reason. Men like him don't." Ethan looked at her. "But she's right about one thing. You need to be careful. Because this isn't over." Mei Lin sat in her dark cabin and thought about everything she'd lost. Everything her aunt had lost. The price of not backing down, of refusing to disappear. And she thought about Thomas, about the letter that had arrived at the ranch that afternoon, a letter she'd shoved in a drawer without reading because she'd recognized his handwriting and known nothing good could come from it. She pulled it out now and read it by candlelight. It was exactly what she'd feared. Thomas had learned where she was, had learned about the ranch, about her job, about everything. And he was coming west with associates to collect what was rightfully his, though what that meant he didn't specify. The letter ended with a warning: "Come quietly, and only you will be affected. Make this difficult, and everyone who helped you will suffer the consequences." She sat there holding the letter and felt the walls closing in. Burke from one side, Thomas from the other, and her aunt's bakery burning between them like a warning of what came next. She could run. Pack up tonight, disappear before Thomas arrived, leave before Burke could do more damage, or she could stay and fight both of them, knowing the odds were terrible and the cost would be high. The smart choice was obvious, but Mei Lin had never been good at making the smart choice. She struck a match and held it to Thomas's letter, watching the paper catch and burn, the words disappearing into ash. If they wanted a fight, she'd give them one, even if it destroyed her in the process. The ashes of the letter were still warm in the basin when Ethan knocked again the next morning. "Montgomery wants to see you," he said through the door. Now. She'd barely slept. Every sound had jerked her awake. Wind, horses, her own thoughts circling like vultures. She dressed quickly, splashed water on her face, and followed Ethan to the main house. Montgomery was in his office, and he wasn't alone. A man she didn't recognize stood by the window, older, maybe 60, wearing a suit too expensive for ranch country. His eyes tracked her as she entered, calculating and cold. "Miss Zhao," Montgomery said, gesturing to a chair. "This is Harrison Whitmore. He's a lawyer from Topeka." The word lawyer sent ice through her veins. "Mr. Whitmore has some questions for you," Montgomery continued, and something in his tone made it clear this wasn't optional. Whitmore pulled out a leather folder and opened it with the kind of precision that suggested he'd done this 1,000 times before. "Miss Zhao, I'm representing the interests of Mr. Thomas Weatherby of Boston. You know that name, I presume?" Her mouth went dry. "Yes." "Good. That saves time." Whitmore extracted a document. Mr. Weatherby has retained me to recover certain property that was stolen from him approximately 5 months ago. Property valued at over $3,000. I didn't steal anything. That's not what Mr. Weatherby claims. According to his testimony, you destroyed several commissioned paintings that belonged to him, broke valuable equipment in his studio, and assaulted him physically before fleeing to avoid prosecution. That's a lie. Is it? Whitmore's expression didn't change. Because I have signed affidavits from 3 witnesses who corroborate his version of events. I have medical records showing Mr. Weatherby received treatment for a broken nose and lacerations. And I have receipts proving he paid for materials, studio space, and your living expenses for a period of 8 months. Montgomery leaned forward. Miss Zhao, is any of this true? Some of it. Not the way he's telling it. Mei Lin forced herself to meet Montgomery's eyes. Thomas Weatherby was my patron. He paid for studio space and materials, but the paintings were mine, not his. I destroyed my own work when I realized he was trying to control what I painted, and I broke his nose because he put his hands on me first. You have proof of this? Whitmore asked. No. Then it's your word against his. And Mr. Weatherby is a respected businessman with multiple character witnesses, while you are... He paused delicately. A Chinese immigrant with no legal standing in this country. The words hung in the air like a noose. What does Weatherby want? Montgomery asked, his voice tight. Restitution for the destroyed property. $3,000, or Miss Zhao returns to Boston to face charges for theft and assault. Whitmore closed the folder. He's given her 1 week to decide. After that, he'll pursue criminal prosecution and civil damages against anyone who has aided her in evading justice. He looked directly at Montgomery when he said it. After Whitmore left, Montgomery sat in silence for a long moment. Tell me the truth, he finally said. All of it. So Mei Lin did. She told him about Thomas's initial kindness, how it had curdled into control, about the paintings he'd tried to force her to make, the criticism that became cruelty, the night he'd grabbed her throat and she'd fought back, about destroying her own paintings rather than letting him profit from them, about running because she'd known no one would believe a Chinese woman over a wealthy white man. When she finished, Montgomery's jaw was tight. $3,000 is a fortune, he said quietly. I don't have that kind of money, Liquid. Even if I did, I'm not asking you to pay it. Mei Lin stood. This is my problem. I'll handle it. How? I don't know yet, but I won't let Weatherby destroy you or anyone else because of me. Sit down. Montgomery's voice was sharp. You're not handling this alone. I don't have a choice. You do. You just don't like the options. He ran a hand through his hair. Weatherby's banking on you being powerless. No money, no legal standing, no witnesses. He thinks you'll fold. He's probably right. Maybe. But there's one thing he didn't account for. Montgomery leaned back. I know people. Judges, lawyers, businessmen, people who owe me favors. And I'm willing to call in every single one of them to fight this. Why? The question came out sharper than she intended. Why would you do that for me? Because I've seen your work. I've watched you turn my disaster of an office into something functional. I've seen how the men respect you even when they don't want to. And I've had enough of rich men using power to crush people who can't fight back. His expression hardened. My daughter died 3 years ago because a wealthy man decided his convenience was more important than her life. He faced no consequences. I'm not watching that happen again if I can stop it. Mei Lin felt something crack in her chest. I can't pay you back. I'm not asking you to. I'm asking you to stay and finish the job I hired you for. He pulled out paper and started writing. I'm sending telegrams today. We have a week to build a case. That's not much time, but it's what we've got. She wanted to argue, wanted to refuse, wanted to tell him this wasn't his fight. But the truth was, she couldn't win this alone. And maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to. Thank you, she said, and meant it more than she'd meant anything in months. Don't thank me yet. We haven't won anything. Montgomery handed her the paper. Take this to the telegraph office in town. And Miss Zhao, be careful. If Weatherby sent Whitmore, he might have sent others. The ride to town felt longer than it should have. Ethan insisted on coming with her, and this time she didn't argue. You didn't have to tell him everything, Ethan said halfway there. Yes, I did. He deserved to know what he was getting into. Most people would have lied, made themselves look better. I'm tired of lying. She looked at him. You think Montgomery's making a mistake helping me? I think Montgomery's a good man who's still grieving his daughter. And good men make stupid decisions when they think they can fix past mistakes by helping someone in the present. Ethan's voice was matter-of-fact. But no, I don't think he's wrong. I think Weatherby's a bastard who deserves to lose. That doesn't mean he will lose. No, but at least you'll go down fighting. The telegraph office was crowded. Apparently Saturday was when everyone decided to send messages, so Mei Lin had to wait. She stood near the window watching the street when she spotted Sarah Miller across the way. The girl saw her at the same moment and hurried over. I heard about the bakery, Sarah said, her face stricken. I'm so sorry. My ma said it was awful. It was. My aunt's staying with the doctor for now. Is she going to rebuild? I don't know. Mei Lin hadn't let herself think that far ahead. Probably not. She doesn't have the money. Sarah bit her lip. People are saying Danny Burke did it, but nobody can prove it. Of course they can't. It's not fair. No, it's not. Mei Lin managed a smile she didn't feel. How's your family? We're fine. Ma's still working too hard, and I'm still trying to convince her to let me get a job in Dodge City, but nothing changes. Sarah glanced toward the telegraph office. You sending important messages? Something like that. Well, if you need anything, I know we're not close or anything, but if you need help, thank you, Sarah, I mean it. After Sarah left, Ethan said quietly, She likes you. She barely knows me. Doesn't matter. Some people can tell when someone's worth liking. He nodded toward the telegraph office. Lines moving. Mei Lin sent the telegrams, 3 of them, to people Montgomery had named, and tried not to think about how much each one cost. Money she didn't have, debts piling up faster than she could count them. On the way back to the ranch, they passed the burned-out bakery. Mei Lin made Ethan stop. The building was worse in daylight. Walls collapsed, roof gone, everything inside reduced to charred rubble. She picked her way through the debris, looking for anything salvageable. There was almost nothing. The oven was cracked beyond repair. The work table was ash. The few pieces of equipment that hadn't burned were so damaged they were useless. In what had been the back corner, she found something that stopped her cold. A small wooden box burned on one side but intact. Inside were letters. Her mother's letters to Aunt Chen spanning 20 years. Somehow they'd survived when everything else had burned. Mei Lin sat in the ruins holding the box and let herself cry for the first time since arriving in Kansas. Ethan found her there 10 minutes later. He didn't say anything, just sat nearby and waited. My mother used to tell me that strength meant enduring, Mei Lin said finally, her voice rough. That the world was cruel to people like us, and the only way to survive was to be harder than it was. Sounds like your aunt. They were sisters, both stubborn, both convinced that showing weakness would get you killed. She wiped her eyes. But I don't think my mother was happy, and I know my aunt isn't. You can be strong and still be happy, Ethan said. They're not mutually exclusive. How would you know? He was quiet for a moment. I killed someone once, a man who deserved it, but that doesn't change the fact that I put a bullet in him and watched him die. Afterward, I thought I had to be hard about it. Lock it away, never think about it, just keep moving forward. Did it work? For a while. Then I realized being hard wasn't the same as being strong. Being hard meant I couldn't feel anything. Being strong meant I could feel it and choose not to let it destroy me. He looked at her. You're one of the strongest people I've met. Don't mistake that for needing to be something you're not. Mei Lin held the box of letters and thought about her mother, about Aunt Chen, about all the ways they'd survived by making themselves into fortresses. She didn't want to be a fortress. She wanted to be a person. We should go, she said, before someone sees us and starts asking questions. That night, Montgomery called her into his office. I heard back from 2 of the people I contacted, he said, gesturing to the telegrams on his desk. Judge Morrison in Topeka says he'll review the case if we can get it to his court. And Catherine Barrett, she runs a women's legal aid organization, says she'll send someone to help build a defense. That's good, right? It's something, but there's a problem. Montgomery's expression was grim. Whitmore filed papers today claiming you're a fugitive from justice. That means local law enforcement is obligated to hold you if Weatherby formally presses charges, And once you're in custody, getting you out becomes significantly harder. So what do I do? You stay on ranch property. Don't go into town. Don't give them any excuse to arrest you. He paused. And you prepare for the possibility that this doesn't go our way. You mean prepare to lose? I mean prepare for multiple outcomes. Best case, we get this to Morrison's court and he throws it out. Worst case, you end up facing charges in Boston. And if that happens, then you run. Tonight, before they can take you into custody. Montgomery's voice was steady. I have contacts who can get you to California. New identity, enough money to start over. It's not ideal, but it's better than prison. Maylin thought about running. Again. Always running, always starting over, never belonging anywhere. I'm tired of running, she said. Then you'd better hope Morrison comes through. Montgomery stood. Catherine's representative should be here in 3 days. Until then, keep your head down and stay out of sight. The 3 days felt like 3 years. Maylin worked in the office, but her mind was elsewhere. Every sound made her jump. Every visitor to the ranch made her wonder if it was the law coming to take her away. The ranch hands noticed. Jack Riley, the one who'd tried to cheat her out of $5, actually asked if she was all right. She told him she was fine, and he'd looked at her like he didn't believe it but wasn't going to push. Even Cooper, who she'd threatened with a pen, brought her coffee one morning without being asked. Heard you're in trouble, he said gruffly. Don't know if it's true or Burke's usual bullshit, but either way, you've been square with us. Figured you should know we noticed. It wasn't much, but it was something. Catherine Barrett's representative arrived on the 3rd day in the form of a woman named Grace Howard, 40-something, sharp-eyed, wearing a traveling suit that had seen better days, and carrying a carpet bag stuffed with legal documents. I've reviewed the materials Mr. Montgomery sent, she said without preamble, spreading papers across the office desk. This is a mess. I know. No, I mean legally it's a disaster. Weatherby has documentation. You have nothing. He has witnesses. You have your word. And the fact that you fled Boston doesn't help your case. So I'm going to lose. I didn't say that. I said it's a disaster. Disasters can sometimes be turned around if you're willing to fight dirty. Grace pulled out a different set of papers. I did some digging into Mr. Thomas Weatherby. Turns out he has a pattern of taking on young female artists as protégés. You're the 4th in 6 years. Maylin's stomach tightened. What happened to the others? One committed suicide, one left the country, one married a man twice her age to escape Weatherby's patronage. None of them pressed charges because they knew no one would believe them. Grace's expression was hard. But patterns matter. If we can get the other women to testify, they won't. If they were too scared to press charges, then they're not going to do it now. Maybe. Maybe not. People get braver when they're not alone. Grace looked at her. Would you be willing to testify, publicly, in detail, about everything he did? The thought made Maylin's skin crawl. Standing in front of strangers, recounting every moment of humiliation and fear, knowing they'd judge her for it. Yes, she said. Good. Because that's our only real chance. We frame this not as theft and assault, but as self-defense and destruction of your own property. We demonstrate a pattern of abuse from Weatherby. We make the jury see you as a victim defending herself, not a criminal fleeing justice. Will it work? I have no idea. But it's better than nothing. That night, Maylin couldn't sleep again. She got up, lit a candle, and started painting. Not the prairie this time, but faces. Thomas's face, cold and controlled. Aunt Chen's face, hard with disappointment. Sarah's face, open and hopeful. Ethan's face, guarded but not unkind. She painted until her hand cramped, until the candle burned low, until the first hint of dawn showed through the window. Then Ethan was knocking on her door, his voice urgent. They're here. Weatherby and his people. They're at the ranch. She opened the door. What? 3 men just rode up to the main house. One of them matches the description Montgomery gave of Weatherby. The other 2 look like hired muscle. What do they want? You. They're demanding Montgomery turn you over. Maylin grabbed her coat. I'm going out there. That's a terrible idea. They're here because of me. I'm not hiding while Montgomery deals with my mess. She pushed past him before he could argue. The 3 men were standing in front of the ranch house when she arrived. Thomas looked exactly as she remembered. Tall, well-dressed, handsome in a way that had once seemed kind but now just looked calculated. The two men with him were younger, broader, wearing guns in a way that suggested they knew how to use them. Thomas's expression when he saw her was triumphant. "Mei Lin," he said, like they were old friends. "I'm glad you came out. Saves us the trouble of coming to find you." "What do you want, Thomas?" "What I've always wanted, for you to take responsibility for your actions." He pulled out a document. "You can sign this agreement to return to Boston and repay what you stole, or I can have the local sheriff arrest you right now. Your choice." Montgomery stepped forward. "She's not going anywhere." "Mr. Montgomery, I appreciate your desire to protect your employee, but this is a legal matter. Miss Zhao is a fugitive, but Miss Zhao is under my protection, and you're trespassing on my property." Montgomery's voice was steel. "You want to pursue this legally? Do it through the courts, but you don't get to show up here and make demands." One of Thomas's hired men shifted, his hand moving toward his gun. Every ranch hand on the property noticed. Jack Riley stepped out of the bunkhouse. Cooper emerged from the barn. Others appeared from various places, all of them armed, all of them watching. Thomas noticed. His smile faltered slightly. "This doesn't have to escalate," he said carefully. "Then leave." Ethan's voice came from behind Mei Lin, quiet but carrying across the yard. "You've got 5 minutes before this becomes a real problem." "I have the law on my side." "Maybe, but right now you've got 15 armed men on the other side, and the nearest sheriff is 2 hours away." Ethan's hand rested on his own gun. "Do the math." Thomas looked at Mei Lin, and something ugly crossed his face. "You think this changes anything? You think hiding behind these people makes you safe?" "I'm not hiding," Mei Lin said, and was surprised by how steady her voice was. "I'm standing right here, and I'm not going with you. Then you'll face the consequences in court. And when you lose, and you will lose, I'll make sure everyone who helped you pays for it too." He turned and walked back to his horse, his hired men following. They rode off, leaving dust and threat hanging in the air. Montgomery exhaled slowly. "Well, that went better than I expected." "Better?" Mei Lin stared at him. "He just threatened all of you." "He did, but he also backed down when he realized we wouldn't." Montgomery looked at the assembled ranch hands. "Thank you, boys. Back to work." They dispersed slowly, most of them nodding to Mei Lin as they passed. Ethan waited until they were gone before saying, "That was stupid. You shouldn't have come out here." "Probably not. Definitely not. If those men had started shooting, but they didn't, because you and Montgomery stood with me." She looked at him. "Why did you do that?" "Because it was the right thing to do." "That's not a real answer." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "Because I've seen too many people get crushed by others with more power, and I decided a long time ago that if I could stop it, I would, even if it's risky, even if it costs me. That's a dangerous way to live," says the woman who just confronted the man trying to destroy her life instead of hiding in her cabin. He almost smiled. "We're both fools, I guess." "I guess so." That evening, Grace Howard gathered everyone in Montgomery's office. Mei Lin, Montgomery, Ethan, and Aunt Chen, who'd been brought to the ranch under cover of darkness. "We have a problem," Grace said without preamble. "Judge Morrison can't hear the case. He's been reassigned to another district, and the replacement judge is someone with ties to Weatherby's family." "So we're done," Aunt Chen said flatly. "Not necessarily, but we need a different strategy." Grace turned to Mei Lin. "There's one option left. We go public. Newspapers, testimonies, everything. We make this so messy and public that Weatherby can't sweep it away quietly." "That'll destroy her reputation," Montgomery said. "Her reputation's already destroyed. This way, at least she controls the narrative." Grace leaned forward. "Weatherby's counting on shame to keep you quiet, on you being too afraid or too proper to air this publicly. If you're willing to break that expectation, I'll do it," Mei Lin said. "You sure? Because once we start this, there's no taking it back. Every detail of your relationship with Weatherby becomes public knowledge. People will judge you, call you things you don't deserve, blame you for his actions." "They already do that." Mei Lin thought about Burke, about Boston, about every person who'd looked at her and decided she was the problem. "At least this way I get to tell the truth." Grace nodded. "Then we start tomorrow. I've got contacts at the Topeka Capitol. They'll run the story if it's compelling enough." "It will be," Mei Lin said, and meant it. That night, Aunt Chen stayed with her in the cabin. "You don't have to do this for me," her aunt said quietly. "The bakery's gone. I can start over somewhere else." "This isn't just for you, it's for me too." Mei Lin looked at her. "I'm tired of letting men like Weatherby and Burke decide what my life looks like. They'll make you pay for this, even if you win." "Probably, but I'd rather pay for fighting back than pay for staying quiet." Aunt Chen was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Your mother would be proud of you. Scared, but proud." "Would you have done the same thing? In my position?" "No. I would have run. That's why I'm in Kansas running a bakery instead of in San Francisco where the rest of the family is." Aunt Chen's voice was soft, regretful. "I spent my whole life avoiding fights, telling myself it was wisdom, but maybe it was just cowardice." "It's not cowardice to survive." "Maybe not, but it's not living either." Her aunt stood. "Whatever happens tomorrow, I'm with you, even if I'm angry about it." The next morning, Mei Lin told Grace Howard everything. Every detail, every moment, every piece of Thomas Weatherby's systematic control and cruelty. Grace wrote it all down, asked questions, pushed for specifics. "This is going to hurt people," Grace warned. "Not just Weatherby. You'll be exposing things about yourself that most women would rather keep private." "I know, and there's still a chance we lose, that the court sides with him anyway, and all this does is make your suffering public entertainment." "I know that too." Mei Lin met her eyes. "But if I don't do this, if I let him win quietly, then every woman who comes after me will face the same thing, and I can't live with that." Grace smiled, small and fierce. "Then let's burn his world down." The story ran in the Topeka Capital 3 days later, under the headline, "Boston Patron or Predator? Artist Speaks Out Against Abuse." It was scathing, detailed, unflinching, and within hours everything exploded. The first telegram arrived before noon, then another, then 6 more in rapid succession, until the telegraph operator in Red Willow Crossing sent a rider out to the ranch just to deliver them all at once. Grace spread them across Montgomery's desk, her expression unreadable. "3 newspapers want interviews," she said. 2 women's advocacy groups are offering legal support, and this one—" She held up a telegram with shaking hands. "This one is from one of Weatherby's previous victims. She's willing to testify." Mei Lin felt something crack open in her chest. "Which one?" "Alice Brennan, the one who left the country. She's in London now, married, but she says if her testimony can help, she'll come back." "That's one," Montgomery said. "We need more than one to establish a pattern." "We'll get more." Grace's voice was certain. "The story is spreading faster than Weatherby can contain it. By tomorrow, half of Boston will be talking about it." She was right. By the next day, 2 more women had come forward. Not just former protégés of Weatherby's, but women who'd experienced similar situations with other wealthy patrons. The story had struck a nerve, ripped open something people had been pretending didn't exist. But the backlash came just as fast. Thomas Weatherby's lawyers released a statement calling Mei Lin a liar, a thief, and a woman of questionable morals trying to destroy a good man's reputation. Several Boston newspapers ran editorials questioning why anyone should believe a Chinese immigrant over an established businessman. Anonymous letters started arriving at the ranch, some threatening, some just hateful. And Danny Burke, seeing an opportunity, started spreading his own version of events around Red Willow Crossing. According to him, Mei Lin had seduced Weatherby, stolen from him, then fled west to trick Montgomery into protecting her. Some people believed him. Others didn't. The town split down the middle, arguments breaking out in the saloon, in the general store, anywhere people gathered. Sarah Miller showed up at the ranch one afternoon with a black eye. "What happened?" Mei Lin asked, ushering her into the office. "Got in a fight with Danny Burke's cousin. She was saying terrible things about you, and I told her to shut up, and she hit me, so I hit her back." Sarah said it matter-of-factly, like getting in fistfights was a regular occurrence. "Ma's furious, says I need to stop defending people who can't defend themselves." "Your mother's probably right. Maybe. But I'm still glad I did it." Sarah touched her swollen eye and winced. "Is it true? Everything in the newspaper?" "Yes." "Then you're braver than anyone I've ever met, and people who can't see that are idiots." After Sarah left, Ethan said, "She's going to get hurt worse if she keeps that up." "I know. I'll talk to her." "Will she listen?" "Probably not." Mei Lin looked at him. Would you? If someone told you to stop defending people? No, but I'm a stubborn fool who's made a career out of bad decisions. Then maybe she's in good company. The hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later in Topeka. Not a trial, Grace explained, but a preliminary hearing to determine if there was enough evidence to proceed with charges against Mei Lin. If they could convince the judge that Weatherby was lying, that Mei Lin had acted in self-defense, the charges would be dropped. If they couldn't, she'd face trial in Boston. What are our chances? Montgomery asked. Better than they were, Grace said, but still not good. We have testimony from 3 women now, but Weatherby's lawyers are arguing it's all coordinated lies. And the judge, she hesitated. Judge Carlton is old-fashioned. He doesn't think highly of women who make accusations against respectable men. So we're walking into a stacked deck. We are. But we're walking in with the truth, and sometimes that matters. Sometimes. Not always. Mei Lin was learning the difference. The night before they were supposed to leave for Topeka, someone set fire to the barn. The alarm went up around midnight. One of the ranch hands on night watch spotted the flames and raised hell. By the time everyone got there, half the barn was burning. The horses had already been let out, panicked and wild-eyed, but the structure itself was lost. It took 2 hours to contain the fire and make sure it didn't spread to the other buildings. By then, everyone was covered in soot and ash, exhausted, and the barn was a smoking ruin. Burke? Montgomery asked Ethan quietly. Probably. Or Weatherby's people. Does it matter? Ethan's face was grim. They're escalating. Next time might not be property. Then we don't give them a next time. Montgomery turned to Mei Lin. We leave for Topeka tonight. Right now, before anyone else decides to make a point. They rode out in darkness. Mei Lin, Montgomery, Ethan, and Grace. Aunt Chen stayed behind, refusing to leave until she knew her niece was safe. The journey to Topeka took 2 days, and Mei Lin spent most of it trying not to think about what would happen if they lost. She failed spectacularly. The courthouse in Topeka was bigger than she'd expected, built from red brick with columns that made it look important. Inside was all dark wood and echoing hallways, and the smell of old paper and older decisions. Judge Carlton turned out to be exactly what Grace had described. 70 if he was a day, with white whiskers and an expression that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else. He listened to the opening arguments with obvious impatience, interrupting Grace twice to tell her to get to the point. Weatherby's lawyer was smooth, polished, presenting his case like he was reading from a script he'd perfected over years. Mei Lin had stolen property. Mei Lin had assaulted his client. Mei Lin had fled to avoid prosecution. Everything else was lies concocted to avoid responsibility. Then it was Grace's turn. She called Alice Brennan first. The woman was thin, nervous, with a British accent she'd apparently picked up during her years in London. But when she started talking about what Weatherby had done to her, the control, the manipulation, the violence when she'd tried to leave, her voice was steady. He told me I was nothing without him, Alice said. That my art was worthless unless he validated it. And when I finally realized he was lying, when I tried to take back control of my own work, he destroyed me. Ruined my reputation, blacklisted me from every gallery in Boston, made sure I could never work as an artist again. Why didn't you press charges? Weatherby's lawyer asked on cross-examination. Because I knew no one would believe me. Because he had power and money and witnesses who would say whatever he paid them to say. Because I was terrified. Alice looked directly at Weatherby. But I'm not terrified anymore. The second witness was even more damning. Rebecca Shaw, who'd been one of Weatherby's protégés 3 years ago, testified that he'd done the same thing to her. The same pattern of control, the same violence, the same destruction when she'd tried to leave. Why should we believe you? Weatherby's lawyer demanded. You've coordinated these stories. You're all lying to destroy Mr. Weatherby's reputation. We're telling the truth, Rebecca said quietly, and the fact that our stories match should tell you something. That this is what he does. That this is who he is. Then Grace called Mei Lin. Walking to the witness stand felt like walking to an execution. Every eye in the courtroom was on her, some sympathetic, some skeptical, some openly hostile. She sat down, put her hand on the Bible, despite not believing in it, and swore to tell the truth. Grace's questions were straightforward. When did you meet Thomas Weatherby? How did the relationship begin? When did it turn controlling? When did he become violent? Mei Lin answered all of it. Every humiliating detail, every moment she'd felt trapped, every time she'd told herself things would get better if she just tried harder to please him. She told them about the night he'd grabbed her throat, about breaking his nose, about destroying her paintings because she'd rather burn her own work than let him profit from it. "Why didn't you go to the police?" Grace asked. "Because I knew they wouldn't believe me. I was a Chinese woman accusing a wealthy white man. That story never ends well." Weatherby's lawyer stood for cross-examination. He was younger than Grace, sharper, with the kind of confidence that came from winning more often than not. "Miss Zhao, isn't it true that you willingly accepted Mr. Weatherby's patronage?" "Yes." "And isn't it true that you lived in a studio he paid for, used supplies he provided, ate food he bought?" "Yes." "So you benefited substantially from his generosity." "I worked for what he gave me. I painted, I followed his directions, You took his money and his resources, then destroyed thousands of dollars worth of property when he tried to end the arrangement. That's theft and vandalism, isn't it?" "No, those paintings were mine. I destroyed my own work." "Work you created with his materials, in his studio, under his patronage. Legally, that makes them his property." Grace objected. The judge sustained it, but the damage was done. Weatherby's lawyer had planted the seed. Mei Lin was ungrateful, destructive, a woman who'd bitten the hand that fed her. The rest of the cross-examination was brutal. Every choice she'd made was questioned, every moment of weakness exposed. Why hadn't she left sooner? Why had she accepted his help in the first place? Why should anyone believe her version of events over his? By the time she stepped down, Mei Lin felt like she'd been flayed open. The judge called a recess. Grace pulled her aside in the hallway. "You did well," she said. "I sounded weak, defensive. You sounded honest, and that matters more." Grace squeezed her shoulder. "It's not over yet." But when they reconvened, Weatherby's lawyer called a surprise witness, Danny Burke. Mei Lin's stomach dropped. Burke took the stand looking pleased with himself, wearing his best suit and a practiced expression of concern. "Mr. Burke, how do you know the defendant?" Weatherby's lawyer asked. "She came to my town a few months ago, claiming to be fleeing some trouble back east. Started working for her aunt, then took a job at a local ranch." Burke shook his head sadly. "I tried to warn people she was trouble, but no one listened." "What made you think she was trouble?" "She was aggressive, confrontational, got into arguments with customers, insulted people who tried to be friendly, and when I asked around about her past, I found out she'd left Boston under questionable circumstances." He looked at the judge. "I'm not saying she's a bad person, but she's definitely someone who causes problems wherever she goes." It was all lies. Or rather, it was truth twisted just enough to sound like she was the villain. Grace tore into him on cross-examination. She got him to admit he'd never actually witnessed Mei Lin stealing anything, that all his information was secondhand gossip, that he'd had a personal conflict with her that might color his testimony. But the damage was done. Burke had painted a picture of Mei Lin as a troublemaker, and the judge had clearly listened. When court adjourned for the day, Grace said, "We're losing. Carlton's buying Weatherby's version." "What do we do?" Montgomery asked. "We present our final witness tomorrow and hope it's enough." Grace looked at Mei Lin. "There's one person who can corroborate your story about the night you left Boston. Someone who was there, who saw what happened." "There was no one there, just me and Thomas." "What about your landlady, the woman who owned the boarding house where you stayed after you left Weatherby's studio?" Mei Lin's heart jumped. "Mrs. Chen, but she's in Boston. There's no way to get her here in time. I sent a telegram 3 days ago. She should arrive tonight." Mrs. Chen turned out to be a tiny Chinese woman in her 60s who spoke English with a thick accent and looked at Weatherby like he was something she'd scraped off her shoe. When Grace called her to the stand the next morning, Weatherby's lawyer immediately objected. "This witness wasn't disclosed," he said. "She was disclosed 3 days ago," Grace countered. "You just didn't bother to check your mail." The judge allowed it. Mrs. Chen testified that Mei Lin had shown up at her boarding house in the middle of the night, bleeding from a cut on her forehead, with bruises forming around her neck. That she'd been terrified, barely coherent, clutching a bag with a few belongings and nothing else. "What did she tell you happened?" Grace asked. "She said the man she was working for had attacked her, that she fought back and ran. She stayed with me for 2 weeks, sleeping with a knife under her pillow, jumping at every sound. Mrs. Chen's voice was firm, clear. I've seen many scared women in my life. Miss Zhao was one of the most frightened. Why didn't you report this to the police? Because I knew they wouldn't care. A Chinese girl accusing a white man? They'd laugh at us both. Weatherby's lawyer tried to discredit her, suggesting she was lying to help someone from her own community, but Mrs. Chen didn't budge. She'd seen what she'd seen, and no amount of aggressive questioning was going to change that. When she stepped down, Mei Lin caught her eye and mouthed, "Thank you." Mrs. Chen nodded once, sharp and final. The closing arguments were everything Mei Lin had feared. Weatherby's lawyer painted her as a manipulative woman who'd seduced a kind patron, stolen from him, then concocted an elaborate lie to avoid consequences. Grace painted Weatherby as a predator who'd systematically abused multiple women and was now using the legal system to silence his latest victim. Judge Carlton listened to both, his expression giving away nothing. "I'll have a decision by tomorrow morning," he said. "Court is adjourned." That night, Mei Lin couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, could barely breathe. She sat in the hotel room Montgomery had paid for and tried to prepare herself for losing. Ethan found her on the balcony, staring at the dark city. "You should try to sleep," he said. "Can't." "Figured." He leaned against the railing beside her. "You know, whatever happens tomorrow, you did something most people don't have the courage to do. You told the truth even when it was dangerous. That matters." "Does it? If I lose, if I end up in prison, does it matter that I told the truth?" "Yes." His voice was certain. "Because every woman who comes after you will know she's not alone. That someone stood up and fought back even when the odds were terrible. That's worth something." "Easy for you to say. You're not the one facing prison." "No, but I faced other things. And I learned that sometimes the right choice isn't the one that saves you. It's the one that means something." He looked at her. "You mean something, Mei Lin. Whether you win tomorrow or not." She wanted to believe him, wanted to think that her suffering had purpose, that speaking out mattered even if she lost everything. But mostly, she was just tired. The next morning, they gathered in the courtroom again. Judge Carlton entered carrying a folder, his expression unreadable. "I've reviewed all the evidence," he said without preamble, "and I've reached a decision." Mei Lin's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. "This case has presented conflicting testimonies and disputed facts. Mr. Weatherby claims Miss Zhao stole from him and assaulted him. Miss Zhao claims she acted in self-defense and destroyed her own property." Carlton paused. "Normally, in such cases, I would side with the party who has the most documentation and credible witnesses. In this case, that would be Mr. Weatherby." Mei Lin felt the floor drop out from under her. "However," Carlton continued, "I've also heard testimony from 3 women describing remarkably similar experiences with Mr. Weatherby. And I've heard from a witness who saw Miss Zhao immediately after the alleged assault, bearing injuries consistent with her version of events." He looked directly at Weatherby. "I don't believe in coincidences, Mr. Weatherby. I believe in patterns. And the pattern here suggests Miss Zhao is telling the truth." The courtroom erupted. Weatherby's lawyer was on his feet objecting. Spectators were talking. Someone was crying. Carlton slammed his gavel. "Order, I'm not finished." When the room quieted, he continued. "I'm dismissing all charges against Miss Zhao. Furthermore, I'm recommending that the district attorney in Boston investigate Mr. Weatherby for fraud and assault. This hearing is concluded." Mei Lin sat there, unable to process what she'd just heard. They'd won. She'd won. Grace was hugging her. Montgomery was shaking her hand. Ethan was smiling that rare smile that made him look 10 years younger. But Mei Lin couldn't quite believe it was real. Then she looked across the courtroom and saw Thomas Weatherby staring at her. His expression was pure hatred, but underneath it was something else. Fear. Because he'd lost. For maybe the first time in his life, he'd tried to destroy someone and failed. Outside the courthouse, a small crowd had gathered. Most were women, some who'd testified, some who'd just come to watch, some who'd read the newspaper stories and wanted to see how it ended. Alice Brennan approached first. "Thank you," she said simply, "for having the courage I didn't. You testified. That took courage. Only because you went first." Alice's eyes were wet. "I've spent 3 years trying to forget what he did. Maybe now I can start trying to heal instead." Rebecca Shaw was next, then Mrs. Chen, then women Mei Lin didn't even know, all of them wanting to tell her that her story had mattered, that speaking out had helped them feel less alone. By the time they made it back to the hotel, Mei Lin was emotionally exhausted. "What happens now?" she asked Grace. "Now, so you go home. Live your life. Let Weatherby deal with the consequences of his actions." Grace smiled. "And maybe think about what you want to do next, because you've got options now. This story's made you famous, or infamous, depending on who you ask." Mei Lin hadn't thought about that, hadn't thought beyond surviving the hearing. "I don't want to be famous," she said. "Too late. But you can decide what to do with it." Grace packed her papers. "The women's legal aid organization I work for would love to have you speak to other women in similar situations. Share your story, help them find courage. If you're interested, I'll think about it." But first she had to go home. The journey back to Red Willow Crossing took 3 days, and with every mile Mei Lin felt something shift inside her. The fear that had been her constant companion for months was finally starting to fade, replaced by something she barely recognized. Hope. When they finally reached the ranch, Aunt Chen was waiting. She took one look at Mei Lin's face and said, "You won." "We won." Aunt Chen pulled her into a hug, brief, awkward, but genuine. "I'm proud of you, even though you're still an idiot for putting yourself through that. I learned from the best." Over the next few weeks, things slowly returned to normal. Or rather, they found a new normal, because nothing could go back to the way it was before. The ranch hands treated Mei Lin with a respect that felt earned rather than grudging. Montgomery increased her wages and gave her more responsibility. And slowly, people from town started coming around. Not everyone. Danny Burke still spread his poison, and some people still believed him. But others, like Sarah Miller, like Mrs. Patterson, like the rancher Wilson, started speaking up. Started saying that maybe they'd been wrong about Mei Lin, that maybe the stories Burke told weren't the whole truth. The change was slow, painful, imperfect, but it was change. 3 months after the hearing, Aunt Chen announced she was rebuilding the bakery. "How?" Mei Lin asked. "You don't have the money." "I do now." Aunt Chen showed her a letter. "Montgomery's organizing a fundraiser. Several people in town have already donated, and you're going to help me design it." "I don't know anything about designing bakeries." "You know about making something from nothing. That's all a bakery is." Aunt Chen's expression softened. "Besides, I'm tired of being angry, tired of letting Burke and men like him decide what I get to do with my life. Time to build something that's actually mine." The new bakery went up that fall, bigger than the old one, with a workspace that actually made sense, and an oven that didn't look like it was held together by hope and spite. Aunt Chen hired Sarah Miller to help, and the girl took to baking like she'd been doing it her whole life. Mei Lin split her time between the ranch and helping with the bakery, and in the evenings she painted. She'd started taking commissions. People wanted her to paint their families, their houses, their businesses. Word had spread about the artist who'd stood up to her abuser, and suddenly everyone wanted to support her work. It was strange being valued for her art after so many years of being told it was worthless. But she was getting used to strange. One evening, 6 months after the hearing, Ethan found her in her cabin painting a landscape of the prairie at sunset. "That's good," he said, looking at the canvas. "You said that about the last 3. "Because they were all good. You've got talent. Careful. Compliments like that might go to my head. Wouldn't be the worst thing." He was quiet for a moment. "I wanted to ask you something." "What?" "Montgomery's thinking about expanding the ranch. Bringing in more cattle, hiring more hands. He'll need someone to manage the finances full-time, someone he trusts." Ethan looked at her. "He wants to offer you a partnership, not just employee, but actual stake in the ranch." Mei Lin set down her brush. "Why?" "Because you're good at what you do. Because he trusts you. Because he thinks you've earned it." Ethan paused. "And because I suggested it." "You did?" "Yeah, seemed like you'd proven yourself enough times that maybe you should get something more permanent than a cabin and a paycheck." He shoved his hands in his pockets, looking uncomfortable. "Also, I was hoping you'd stay. Permanently." "Why?" "Because I've gotten used to having you around. Because you make this place better. Because—" He stopped, clearly struggling with words. "Because I care about you, and I'd like the chance to see if you might care about me too." It wasn't a grand declaration, wasn't poetry or romance or anything close to what Thomas had offered her with his smooth words and calculated charm. It was honest, awkward, real. "I care about you," Maylin said quietly. "I have for a while. I just didn't think that I felt the same, that you'd want to deal with all my complications." "Everyone's got complications. Yours are just more dramatic than most." He almost smiled. "But I've handled worse. I think I can handle you." That's the least romantic thing anyone's ever said to me. "Good. Romance is overrated. Honesty's better." She laughed, surprising herself. "You're ridiculous." "I know. So what do you say? About the partnership and about—" He gestured vaguely between them. "This." Maylin thought about it. About staying in Kansas. About building something permanent. About letting herself trust someone again despite everything that had happened. It was terrifying. It was also everything she wanted. "Yes," she said, "to all of it." 2 years later, Maylin stood in the town square of Red Willow Crossing, watching children run past the rebuilt bakery, past the general store where a new owner had replaced Burke after his father finally cut him off, past the schoolhouse where she now taught painting classes twice a week. The town had changed. She'd changed it, in small ways and large. Her story had spread beyond Kansas, inspiring other women to speak out, to fight back, to refuse to accept that their pain was the price of survival. It hadn't fixed everything. There was still prejudice, still people who looked at her and saw only her race, still moments when she felt like an outsider. But there were also moments like this, standing in the autumn sunlight, watching Sarah Miller teach a new bakery apprentice how to knead dough, seeing Aunt Chen laugh at something Montgomery said, feeling Ethan's hand find hers. She'd survived, but more than that, she'd built something. A life, a community, a future. That evening, she painted the town square exactly as she'd seen it that afternoon. Not prettified or romanticized, but honest. The cracked sidewalk, the peeling paint on some buildings, the mix of people, some welcoming, some still suspicious. Real. Imperfect. Hers. When Ethan came home, and it was home now, the cabin they'd expanded together, he looked at the painting and said, "You're getting better. I've had practice." "You have. But that's not what I meant." He pointed at the painting. "You used to paint things as you wished they were. Now you paint them as they are. Is that better?" "It's more honest, and honest is always better." Maylin looked at the painting and thought about everything it had taken to get here. The fear, the fighting, the failures, the moments she'd wanted to give up, the times she'd been certain she'd made the wrong choice. But she'd survived it all. More than survived. She'd turned her suffering into something that mattered. Not because she was special, not because she was particularly brave or strong or wise, but because she'd refused to let anyone else write her story. She'd grabbed the pen herself, shaky and uncertain, and written it anyway. With all the mistakes and crossed out lines and messy rewrites that came with it. And the story she'd written, the one she was still writing, was hers. That was worth everything. "Come on," Ethan said, pulling her away from the easel. "Sarah's bringing over dinner and your aunt's coming too. Something about wanting to try a new bread recipe on us. We're guinea pigs? We're family, which means we get volunteered for these things." Family. The word still felt strange sometimes, like clothes that didn't quite fit yet, but might with time. But Maylin was learning to wear it anyway. Because if there was one thing she'd learned from the past 2 years, it was that belonging wasn't something you waited for someone to give you. It was something you built piece by piece, choice by choice, day by day. And she was building, not a fortress, not a hiding place, just a life. Messy and imperfect and completely, undeniably hers. She looked out at the prairie stretching beyond the town, at the sky painted in shades of orange and purple, at the home she'd somehow found in the most unlikely of places. And for the first time in her life, Maylin Zhao felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Not because it was easy, not because it was perfect, but because she'd fought for it, bled for it, earned it. And that made all the difference.